Good evening and welcome to the Sleepy Geographer. This is your space to slow down, to let the mind drift, and to gently wander through the quiet corners of our planet. Tonight, we're setting sail for the world of islands, those remarkable places that seem to float like scattered jewels upon the sea. They are at once remote and connected, small yet infinite in their stories. Islands are worlds within worlds, each carrying its own tale of birth, life, and change. Before we begin our journey, I would love to know, where are you listening from tonight? It is always a joy to see the wide sweep of places this little corner of calm manages to reach. If you find these voyages help you relax, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel is a wonderful way to support what we are building here. To those already subscribed, thank you sincerely. You're a treasured part of this journey. And don't worry, I shall try not to make things so fascinating that they keep you awake. Though if that happens, at least your dreams may be filled with newfound wonders. So let us step softly onto the shore of our topic. What makes islands such powerful places of imagination? Why do they stand apart in both geography and in the human mind? To think about islands is to think about the meeting of water and land, and about the curious balance between separation and connection. These are fragments of Earth that have broken away or risen anew, places where isolation shapes every tree, every creature, and every human who calls them home. Islands remind us of resilience. Volcanic rock turned to lush jungle, reefs born from the slow building of coral, communities thriving on the edge of vast seas. They are also the stage for some of our oldest stories. Sailors scanning the horizon dreamed of mythical lands beyond the mist. Writers and thinkers have long used islands as metaphors for solitude, discovery, and survival. And in science, islands have been classrooms for evolution, shaping ideas that forever changed how we understand life itself. This journey will be a slow drift across these scattered worlds, pausing to explore their fiery origins, their fragile beauty, their tangled histories, and the quiet lessons they carry. By the end, you may find that islands are not just small corners of land surrounded by sea. They are mirrors, reflecting back the creativity of nature and the imagination of humankind. So as you listen, let your thoughts ebb and flow like a tide, and consider this. If every island is a world of its own, what hidden worlds might still be waiting out there, just beyond the horizon? Imagine standing at the edge of an island where black rock meets the ocean, steam hissing as waves strike against fresh lava. The air carries the sharp scent of minerals, and beneath your feet lies a land that only recently emerged from the depths of the earth. Volcanic islands are some of the most dramatic creations of our planet, born in violence yet often transformed into havens of extraordinary beauty. They are reminders that destruction and creation can be two sides of the same coin. The story of these islands begins far below the seafloor, in the restless interior of the Earth. Our planet's outer shell is not a single unbroken surface, but a puzzle made up of tectonic plates. These vast slabs drift slowly, carried by currents of molten rock deep within the mantle. When they collide, split apart, or slide past one another, immense forces are unleashed. Volcanic islands are among the most striking results of this hidden drama. There are different ways these islands come into being. Along the edges of plates, where one slides beneath another, magma can rise to the surface and break through as fiery eruptions. The islands of Japan, for example, trace their origins to this process. Elsewhere, plates move apart and molten rock wells up to fill the gap, forming chains of islands like Iceland. Then there are the hotspots, curious points where plumes of heat rise from deep within the mantle, punching through the crust to form volcanoes that may tower above the waves. The Hawaiian Islands are perhaps the most famous example of a hotspot's handiwork, each island marking a moment in the Pacific Plate's long journey across a fixed fountain of fire. It is astonishing to think that entire landscapes can be built by such processes. A single eruption can add new land overnight, while centuries of activity sculpt mountains, valleys, and coastlines. At first, the surface seems barren, a dark canvas of hardened lava with sharp ridges and little sign of life. Yet nature is patient. Seeds carried by birds or drifting on ocean currents find purchase in cracks. Rain and wind weather rock into soil. Slowly green shoots emerge, followed by forests, insects and birds. Over time, a vibrant ecosystem thrives on what once looked like lifeless stone. Hawaii offers one of the most vivid examples of this transformation. The islands began as piles of basaltic lava, built layer upon layer by repeated eruptions. Today, they're cloaked in rainforests, crowned by snow-tipped peaks, and fringed with coral reefs. Kilauea, one of Earth's most active volcanoes, has erupted countless times in living memory, sometimes destroying homes and roads, yet also adding new territory to the island. It is a paradox that a force so destructive can simultaneously be an architect of paradise. Volcanic islands come in many forms. Some are towering, rugged giants like Hawaii's Mauna Kea, which rises more than 10,000 meters from its base on the seafloor, making it the tallest mountain on Earth if measured from the ocean bottom. Others are tiny outcrops, little more than jagged rocks jutting above the waves, the last remnants of ancient volcanoes worn down by wind and sea. In some places, entire chains form, each island representing a different chapter in a long geological story. As older islands erode and sink, younger ones rise, creating a moving tapestry of land across the ocean. Life on these islands has always been closely tied to the power beneath them. For the people who first settled volcanic lands, the ground itself seemed alive, unpredictable, and divine. Many cultures revered volcanoes as sacred, seeing in their eruptions the presence of gods or spirits. The Polynesians who settled Hawaii spoke of Pele, the goddess of fire, who shaped the land with her temper and her passion. Similar beliefs can be found from the slopes of Mount Fuji in Japan to the fiery mountains of Indonesia, where eruptions were seen as messages from the divine. For scientists, volcanic islands hold another kind of revelation. They are natural laboratories where the processes of geology and biology can be observed in sharp relief. Charles Darwin, when sailing on the HMS Beagle, studied the Galapagos Islands, themselves volcanic in origin. He marvelled at how each island, with its own conditions and history, nurtured distinct species of plants and animals. The isolation of these islands helped him form his theory of evolution by natural selection. Without volcanic islands, the story of modern science might have unfolded quite differently. There's also something deeply humbling about their fragility. A volcanic island is constantly changing. Erosion gnaws at cliffs, waves grind down coastlines, and over millennia the land may sink back beneath the sea. New islands are sometimes born suddenly, like Surtsey off the coast of Iceland, which erupted from the sea in the 1960s. For scientists, Surtsey offered a rare chance to watch life colonize a brand new land from scratch. Mosses, lichens, and seabirds arrived first, followed by more complex communities. The island became a living experiment in how ecosystems take root. Despite their beauty and importance, volcanic islands can also be perilous. Their slopes are prone to landslides, their coasts to tsunamis triggered by undersea quakes or collapsing lava domes. Entire communities have been reshaped or destroyed by eruptions. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 obliterated most of the island and sent shockwaves around the world, its sound reportedly heard thousands of kilometers away. Yet out of that devastation, new life took hold, and today Anak Krakatau, the child of Krakatoa, rises in the same waters, proof of Earth's restless cycle of renewal. What makes volcanic islands so captivating is their duality. They embody both violence and peace, creation and destruction. One moment a mountain belches fire into the sky, the next it offers a tranquil landscape of beaches, forests and human settlements. This constant tension seems to mirror life itself, fragile, unpredictable, yet always finding ways to endure. As you picture these islands, rising like emeralds from the blue, consider the forces at work beneath them. Every grain of sand on a volcanic beach, every curve of a mountain ridge, every lush valley filled with birdsong, all of it is a gift of fire. And perhaps that is why these places resonate so deeply. They remind us that even in the heart of destruction, there lies the possibility of new beginnings. Out in the wide ocean, far from the sight of any mainland, lie some of the most delicate yet resilient structures on Earth. At first glance, they seem impossibly fragile. Rings of sand, tiny crescents of land, shallow lagoons glowing turquoise under the sun. Yet beneath the waves, hidden in the slow work of countless tiny creatures, are the foundations of coral reefs and atolls. These are the great castles of the sea, built not by human hands but by living organisms smaller than a fingernail, whose combined efforts over centuries and millennia create vast underwater fortresses. Coral itself is often mistaken for rock or even for a plant, but it is an animal, specifically a colony of countless tiny polyps. Each polyp is a soft-bodied creature that builds a hard skeleton of calcium carbonate around itself, a bit like a mason laying down stone. When millions of polyps live together, they form the branching, brain-like and antler-shaped structures we recognize as coral reefs. Within their tissues, corals host microscopic algae called zooxanthellae, which provide energy through photosynthesis. This partnership is one of nature's quiet marvels. The algae gain shelter and nutrients, while the corals receive the sugars that fuel their growth. Without this relationship, reefs would not exist. Over immense stretches of time, corals slowly layer upon themselves. Old skeletons become the base, and new growth builds upward toward the sunlight. Eventually, entire underwater landscapes emerge. They can stretch for hundreds of kilometers, forming vibrant ecosystems so complex that they are sometimes called the rainforests of the sea. Charles Darwin was one of the first to unravel the mystery of how certain reefs take the shape they do. While sailing through the Pacific in the 19th century, he noticed the ring-like structures of atolls, circular reefs enclosing lagoons, often with just a thin strip of land around the edges. How could such formations come about? Darwin proposed a simple yet elegant explanation. He suggested that volcanic islands, once crowned by fringing reefs along their shores, gradually subsided into the sea. As the land sank, the coral kept growing upward, always reaching for sunlight. Over time, the original island disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only the circular reef behind. The lagoon marked the space where the island once stood. Modern science has confirmed his insight. Darwin, it turned out, had read the sea's story correctly. To picture an atoll is to imagine a dreamlike landscape. A ring of coral and sand encircling a lagoon of calm, shallow water, cut off from the restless ocean beyond. Palm trees bend in the breeze, seabirds wheel overhead, and beneath the surface lies a world of astonishing diversity. Thousands of species of fish weave through the coral maze, their colours shifting like living jewels. Sea turtles glide slowly across the lagoon, while moray eels lurk in crevices and sharks patrol the outer reef. Every crevice, every branching coral, is a home to something, from tiny shrimp and crabs to dazzling schools of fish that flash silver in the light. The scale of these ecosystems is staggering. The Great Barrier Reef, stretching along the coast of Australia, is so vast it can be seen from space. It is composed of thousands of individual reefs, forming the largest living structure on Earth. Yet even smaller reef systems are no less impressive. A single square metre of healthy reef may contain more species than a tropical rainforest floor. This density of life is why reefs are often described as the beating hearts of the ocean. For humans, reefs and atolls have long been both a resource and a refuge. Many island communities depend on reef fish as a staple food source, and reefs act as natural breakwaters, softening the force of waves and protecting shorelines from erosion. Navigators of old often used reefs as markers, knowing that a sudden change in water colour, from deep blue to light turquoise, meant shallow ground and the promise of land nearby. For modern travellers, reefs are places of wonder, drawing divers and snorkelers into their kaleidoscope of shapes and colours. Yet the beauty of reefs is matched by their vulnerability, because they rely on a delicate balance of temperature, light and water chemistry. They're exquisitely sensitive to change. When ocean waters grow too warm, corals expel their algal partners in a stress response known as bleaching. Without the algae, the corals turn ghostly white and lose their main source of food. If the stress continues for too long, they die, leaving behind a skeletal graveyard. Rising sea temperatures, acidification caused by increased carbon dioxide, and pollution from human activity all pose serious threats. Despite this fragility, reefs are also capable of recovery. Given clean water and time, bleached reefs can regain their algae, and damaged areas can sprout new coral growth. Some communities are now working to actively restore reefs, transplanting fragments of coral to help them re-establish. It is slow, careful work, but it carries hope that these ecosystems, if given a chance, can continue to thrive. Atolls themselves can be both idyllic and precarious. With little more than a thin strip of land above the sea, they are highly vulnerable to rising sea levels and storms. Freshwater supplies are scarce, often dependent on rainfall that filters into shallow aquifers. Life on such islands demands adaptation and resourcefulness. The coconut palm, sometimes called the tree of life, provides food, drink and material for shelter. Fish and shellfish supply protein, and trade with neighbouring islands has long been essential. These narrow rings of land may look like paradise, but survival upon them has always been a delicate balance. There is also something deeply symbolic about reefs and atolls. They show us that grandeur can be built from the tiniest of efforts. Polyps, each no larger than a grain of rice, come together to construct palaces that last for millennia. They remind us that ecosystems thrive not through dominance but through cooperation. Corals with their algae, fish with their coral shelters, people with their environment. The next time you imagine a tropical island, picture not only the sandy beaches and swaying palms, but also the living foundation beneath the waves. Every ripple of colour, every darting fish, every patch of coral is part of a story millions of years in the making. Coral reefs and atolls are nature's masterpieces, fragile castles that continue to nurture life in the midst of the endless sea. And though they may seem delicate, their very existence is proof of endurance, patience, and the quiet strength of countless small lives working together. The story of islands is not only one of fire and coral, but also of ice. When you picture an island, perhaps the mind drifts to palm trees and turquoise lagoons. Yet many of the world's most striking islands were carved by glaciers. These slow-moving rivers of ice reshaped entire landscapes, gouging valleys, slicing through rock, and leaving behind scattered fragments of land as reminders of their immense power. During the Great Ice Ages, much of the northern hemisphere was locked beneath thick sheets of ice, in some places more than 2 kilometers deep. These glaciers were not static but restless, grinding forward under their own immense weight, sculpting the land like a chisel against stone. As they advanced, they plucked rocks from the ground and dragged them along, carving deep scars into the landscape. When the climate warmed and the ice melted, the seas rose and flooded the valleys, turning them into the coastlines and island chains we know today. One of the most dramatic results of this icy work is the fjord. A fjord is a long, narrow inlet with steep cliffs rising on either side, formed when a glacier cut a deep valley below sea level, later filled by the ocean. Norway is perhaps the most famous showcase, its coastline a labyrinth of fjords that stretch inland like watery fingers. These fjords are flanked by mountains that rise almost vertically from the sea, their surfaces still bearing the polished marks of glacial abrasion. Similar fjords can be found in New Zealand, Chile, Canada and Greenland, each telling the same story of ice meeting stone, Glaciers also left behind archipelagos, vast groups of islands scattered across the sea. Take the coast of Sweden and Finland, where the Baltic archipelago consists of tens of thousands of islands, many of them smooth granite domes left exposed when the ice retreated. These rocky outcrops, ranging from tiny skerries, barely large enough for a single tree, to full islands with villages, create a seascape that feels almost endless. The sheer number of islands, over 30,000 around Stockholm alone, is a reminder of just how profoundly glaciers transformed the region. The British Isles owe their very shape to the end of the last ice age. For much of prehistory, Britain was not an island at all, but part of the European mainland. A great plain known as Doggerland once connected what is now England to the continent, stretching across the southern North Sea. People lived there, hunted there, and built their lives upon it. As the ice sheets melted and the seas rose, this land was gradually drowned, leaving behind the channel waters that separate Britain from France today. The islands we now think of as so distinct, England, Scotland, Ireland, are the result of those rising seas cutting away the low-lying land. Elsewhere, glacial flooding reshaped coastlines into intricate mosaics. In Canada, the retreat of ice created the Canadian Arctic archipelago, a sprawling network of islands that stretch toward the pole. The largest, Baffin Island, is vast enough to be considered a subcontinent in its own right, while countless smaller islands dot the surrounding waters like broken shards. This is a landscape of extremes, where the legacy of ice is still present in the glaciers that continue to cling to high peaks and tundra plains. Greenland itself is technically the world's largest island, though its identity is inseparable from ice. Nearly 80% of its surface is covered by a massive ice sheet, which at times flows outward to meet the sea in towering cliffs of ice that carve into icebergs. The coasts, however, reveal how glaciers have carved countless fjords and valleys, creating a rugged terrain where settlements cling to narrow strips of habitable land. To travel along Greenland's shores is to witness a living museum of glacial work. What makes glacially shaped islands so compelling is their mixture of severity and beauty. There is something haunting in a landscape stripped bare by ice, where granite surfaces gleam with scratches from ancient glaciers and deep lakes fill hollows left by melting ice blocks. At the same time, these places host an abundance of life. Fjords, though stark in appearance, are rich ecosystems, where cold, nutrient-laden waters support fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. The interplay of sheer cliffs, dark waters, and rich wildlife creates a scene both dramatic and deeply alive. Beyond their ecological richness, these islands hold cultural significance. In Norway, fjords have long-shaped settlement patterns, trade, and even mythology. Communities developed along narrow strips of land between mountain and sea, relying on fishing and navigation through the sheltered waterways. In Scotland, the Hebrides archipelago, sculpted by ice and sea, became a stronghold of Gaelic culture, where traditions and language were preserved through centuries of relative isolation. In Iceland, the memory of glaciers remains ever present in folklore, with tales of trolls and spirits said to inhabit remote valleys. It is easy to forget just how recent this transformation was in geological terms. The last ice age ended only around 12,000 years ago, a blink in Earth's long history. The coastlines that today seem timeless were in fact flooded and reshaped in the recent past. Had you stood on the shores of northern Europe before that time, you would have looked out across a grassy plain, not an open sea. Entire landscapes now lost beneath the waves remind us that islands are not fixed but fluid, shaped by forces far larger than ourselves. There is also a certain poetry in the contrast between fire-born islands and those born of ice. Where volcanic islands emerge in sudden bursts of violence, glacial islands are revealed through slow retreat. One is the product of explosive creation, the other of patient erosion. Yet both result in new worlds, set apart by water, ready to host life and culture. Today, as glaciers continue to retreat in places like Greenland and Antarctica, new islands are still being uncovered. When the weight of ice lifts from the land, the crust slowly rises in a process known as isostatic rebound. Areas once pressed down by glaciers are gradually springing back upward, creating new islands and reshaping old coastlines. It is a reminder that Earth's surface is never still and that the story of ice and sea is ongoing. So the next time you see a map dotted with island chains, picture the hand of ice at work. Imagine the vast white sheets that once covered entire continents, grinding and carving, then melting and giving way to seas that rose and flooded the valleys. These islands are the fingerprints of glaciers scattered across the oceans, their presence a quiet testament to the immense, slow-moving power of ice and the patient artistry it leaves behind. To step onto an island is often to step into another world. Creatures and plants that seem familiar at first glance may turn out to be subtly, or sometimes dramatically, different from anything found elsewhere. This is the puzzle of isolation. When life is cut off by stretches of ocean, it begins to follow its own curious rules, leading to outcomes that range from the charming to the downright bizarre. One of the clearest results of isolation is endemism, a term scientists use for species found nowhere else. Islands are hotspots of endemism because their inhabitants live within boundaries as clear as a moat around a castle. Once a group of animals or plants makes it to an island, perhaps carried by winds, washed ashore on floating debris, or flown in by accident, they are marooned. Over generations, they adapt to their unique surroundings, gradually drifting away from their mainland relatives until they become something new altogether. Take the Galapagos Islands, which Charles Darwin visited in the 19th century. Here, he found finches that had evolved different beak shapes depending on the food available on each island, some designed for crushing seeds, others for probing cactus flowers, and others still for catching insects. These birds were all descended from a common ancestor, yet isolation had sculpted them into specialists for different ecological niches. Darwin's observations helped inspire his theory of natural selection, showing how isolation could accelerate the branching of life into diverse forms. Sometimes the results are stranger still. Consider the Komodo dragon, the largest lizard alive today. Restricted to a handful of Indonesian islands, these giants can grow up to 3 meters long and weigh as much as a small deer. They evolved in isolation without large mammalian predators, filling a niche that elsewhere might be occupied by big cats or wolves. The Komodo dragon is a reminder that islands often shuffle the deck of evolution, dealing out unexpected winners. Then there are the giant tortoises of places like the Galapagos and the Seychelles. On the mainland, tortoises rarely reach such monumental sizes, but in isolation they thrive without many predators and with abundant vegetation to graze. Slow-moving and ancient-seeming, some live for more than a century, their shells like living fossils. Their very presence raises questions. Why here and not elsewhere? The answer lies in the peculiar circumstances of island life, where competition is limited and ecological opportunities are wide open. Isolation can also drive creatures in the opposite direction, leading to dwarfism rather than gigantism. Fossil remains show that tiny elephants once roamed Mediterranean islands, some no taller than a large dog. With limited food supplies and no large predators, smaller bodies proved advantageous. Likewise, on Flores, the same Indonesian island chain that hosts Komodo dragons, archaeologists discovered the remains of a diminutive species of human nicknamed the Hobbit. Standing barely over a metre tall, Homo floresiensis may have evolved small stature for similar reasons: survival on a resource-limited island. These patterns are so striking that scientists often refer to islands as natural laboratories. With clearly defined boundaries, simple ecosystems and limited variables, islands allow researchers to study how species adapt, thrive, or falter under specific conditions. They are places where the grand theories of evolution can be observed in miniature, like experiments carried out on a planetary scale. The balance of predators and prey, the effects of limited space, the trade-offs of size. All of these dynamics play out vividly on islands. Plants too show extraordinary quirks under isolation. In New Zealand, which broke away from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, evolution wandered down paths seldom seen elsewhere. Birds took on roles usually filled by mammals, while plants developed unusual defences, such as stiff, spiky leaves to deter the now extinct giant flightless birds known as moas. Without browsing mammals like deer or cattle, the flora evolved in strikingly different directions. Even today, New Zealand's forests feel slightly uncanny, with their towering tree ferns and melodious bird calls echoing in the absence of mammals. Isolated islands also tend to become havens for flightless birds. With no predators to escape from, the energy cost of maintaining wings becomes unnecessary, and flight fades away over generations. The dodo of Mauritius, now extinct, is the most famous example. These plump, ungainly birds were perfectly suited to their predator-free island, until humans arrived with hungry appetites and invasive species. Other examples still survive. The kiwi in New Zealand, the kakapo parrot that chooses to walk rather than fly, and the rails scattered across Pacific islands. Each of these species tells a story of adaptation in the absence of danger. What makes island isolation so fascinating is the sheer unpredictability of its results. On one island, a creature might grow to extraordinary size. On another, it might shrink. A plant might lose its defences or evolve new ones entirely. Birds might become stronger flyers, or they might abandon flight altogether. The rules of evolution bend and twist in directions that seem counterintuitive, yet always in response to the local environment. For humans encountering these islands, the sense of wonder has always been profound. Early explorers arriving at the Galapagos, or at Madagascar, or at far-flung Pacific atolls must have felt as though they had stumbled into alternate worlds. Even today, scientists setting foot on isolated islands often find new species, sometimes tiny snails or insects, other times mammals or reptiles that have gone unnoticed for centuries. The fact that unknown species still await discovery on Earth, hidden away on remote islands, is itself a thrilling reminder of the planet's richness. But isolation is a double-edged sword. The same qualities that allow unique species to evolve also make them vulnerable. Having adapted to predator-free environments, many island creatures lack defences against new arrivals. When humans introduced cats, rats, goats, and other animals to island ecosystems, devastation often followed. Birds that never learned to fear were wiped out in decades. Plants that had thrived for millennia were grazed to extinction, and entire ecosystems collapsed. The dodo is only the most famous casualty. Countless lesser-known species disappeared quietly. Despite these losses, islands continue to captivate us because they reveal nature's creativity at its most unrestrained. They show us that evolution is not a straight path, but a branching, twisting process that explores possibilities wherever it can. Each island is like a separate experiment, running in parallel with all the others, producing results as varied as dragon-like lizards, tortoises the size of armchairs, parrots that cannot fly, and flowers that bloom only in the presence of specific insects. In the end, the puzzle of isolation teaches us something profound about life itself. Cut off from the rest of the world, species are pushed to innovate, to find novel ways of surviving. Sometimes those innovations are beautiful, sometimes peculiar, sometimes tragic. Yet always they remind us that diversity springs not just from abundance, but also from limitation. An island may be small, but within its shores, the possibilities of evolution stretch as wide as the sea that surrounds it. There is something about islands that tugs at the imagination more than any other landscape. A mountain may impress with its height, a desert with its vastness, but an island offers mystery. Surrounded by water, cut off from the rest of the world, it invites questions. What lies beyond the horizon? Who might live there? What secrets might be hidden on its shores? For millennia, people have woven stories of enchanted islands, some real, some imagined, and many straddling the line between the two. Perhaps the most enduring of these is Atlantis, the fabled island described by the Greek philosopher Plato. He wrote of a powerful civilization that flourished thousands of years before his own, only to vanish beneath the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. To Plato, Atlantis was a moral tale, a warning against arrogance and greed. Yet over the centuries the story took on a life of its own. Explorers searched for the lost island in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, even under the ice of Antarctica. None ever found it, but the allure of a great civilization swallowed by the sea has never faded. Atlantis is less a place than an idea, a mirror reflecting our fascination with lost knowledge and forgotten grandeur. Closer to home for medieval Europeans was Avalon, the mythical island from the legends of King Arthur. Said to be a land of eternal youth and healing, Avalon was where Arthur was taken after his final battle, to rest until the day he would return. The image of an island shrouded in mist where heroes sleep and magic lingers captured imaginations across centuries. Some placed Avalon at Glastonbury, others saw it as a purely mystical realm. The precise geography mattered less than the promise. Somewhere beyond sight lies a place untouched by time, a sanctuary from the struggles of the world. This pattern repeats across cultures. For the Irish there was Tir na Nog, the land of everlasting youth, often imagined as a distant island reached only by a long voyage across the sea. In Japanese folklore, the island of Horai was thought to be home to immortals and treasures. Polynesian navigators spoke of Hawaii, the spiritual homeland from which their ancestors came, and to which spirits would return after death. Across continents and oceans, people envisioned perfect or perilous islands beyond the known world, projecting their hopes and fears onto distant horizons. Part of this fascination lies in the psychology of remoteness. An island, by definition, is apart. It is bounded and finite, a place where the imagination can roam without limits, but within clear edges. From afar, an island can seem like an entire world in miniature. Its isolation invites the thought that anything could exist there. Civilizations with strange customs, landscapes of marvels, creatures unknown. Before the age of accurate maps, cartographers often filled empty seas with sketches of mythical islands, complete with fanciful names and occasional sea monsters to ward off the curious. Even as exploration advanced, phantom islands persisted. Sailors reported land that later vanished or could not be found again. High Brazil, said to lie west of Ireland, appeared on maps for centuries, though no one ever confirmed its existence. The island of St. Brendan, supposedly sighted by a monk during his legendary voyage, was another spectral land that haunted charts of the Atlantic. These places reveal how the human mind craves wonder at the edges of knowledge. Where certainty fades, myth rushes in to fill the void. There is also the island as refuge, a place of escape from the complexities of the world. Utopian visions often take island form. Thomas More, when he wrote his book Utopia in the 16th century, set his ideal society on an island separated from the mainland by a man-made channel. The separation made it possible for harmony to exist, shielded from corruption. The very geography of an island makes it tempting to imagine perfection, contained and protected. But the same remoteness that suggests paradise can also inspire fear. Islands have often been imagined as places of danger, where monsters dwell and strange forces hold sway. The Odyssey of Homer is filled with such encounters. The island of the Cyclops, the island of Circe, the deadly sirens luring sailors to ruin. Each island is a stage for trial and transformation, for seafarers in the ancient Mediterranean, whose lives depended on unpredictable winds and fragile ships. Islands were both vital havens and potential traps. Even in modern times, the mystique of the island endures. Think of the popularity of fictional islands in literature and film. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island gave us the archetype of buried riches and pirate hideouts. Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe imagined the survival of a castaway on a deserted shore, a story that has echoed through countless retellings. More recently, islands continue to serve as settings for adventure, from mysterious laboratories in pulp stories to entire lost worlds in cinema. Something about their isolation makes islands the perfect backdrop for the extraordinary. The pull of these myths may also speak to something deeper in human psychology, the desire for boundaries. On the mainland, the horizon stretches without end, but an island provides a complete world, its limits visible, its secrets contained. In that sense, islands offer reassurance. They are places we can imagine fully, whether as utopias, prisons, or realms of magic. The ocean around them acts as both barrier and protection, keeping the story intact. What is striking is how often these mythical islands embody a sense of longing. Atlantis speaks of a lost greatness we wish to rediscover. Avalon promises rest and renewal, a chance to return when the world needs saving. Utopian islands whisper of societies more harmonious than our own. Even the darker tales of sirens and sorcery suggest that somewhere beyond the horizon lies the possibility of transformation, whether for good or ill. So much of our fascination with islands is not about what is there, but about what might be there. A smudge on the horizon, a rumour passed from sailor to sailor, a gap on a map, each is enough to spark a world of imagination. Islands, real or mythical, remind us that mystery is never far away. They sit at the edges of our vision, promising that just out of reach lies something different, something other, something worth dreaming about. And perhaps that is the greatest myth of all, the idea that beyond the waves, hidden in the mist, there is always another island waiting to be found, holding the answer to questions we have not yet asked. To live on an island is to accept limits and then find ways to turn them into strengths. Resources are finite, space is confined, and the sea both protects and isolates. Yet throughout history, people have not only survived on islands, but built thriving societies that dazzled with culture, ingenuity, and resilience. From the remote statues of Easter Island to the sprawling archipelagos of the Maldives and the Philippines, island civilizations show how humans adapt when surrounded by the endless blue. Easter Island, known to its inhabitants as Rapa Nui, is one of the most striking examples. It lies more than 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continent, one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. Despite its remoteness, the Rapa Nui people created a society renowned for its artistry, most famously the moai, the colossal stone statues with solemn faces gazing inland. These statues, some weighing over 80 tons, were carved from volcanic rock and transported across the island using methods that remain debated to this day. Some researchers suggest they were rolled on logs, others that they were walked upright using ropes and a careful rocking motion. However it was done, the feat required not only technical skill but social organisation, cooperation, and shared belief. Life on Rapa Nui was never easy. The island is small and resources were limited. Over centuries, deforestation and soil depletion put strain on the society. Oral traditions speak of hardships, and by the time Europeans arrived in the 17th century, the population had dwindled. Yet the endurance of the culture is remarkable. The language, dances, and traditions still survive among the islanders today, and the moai stand as a lasting reminder of human ambition to create meaning even in the most constrained of places. While Easter Island represents the extreme of isolation, the Maldives show a different kind of adaptation. This nation consists of more than 1,000 islands scattered like pearls across the Indian Ocean, with only about 200 of them inhabited. The Maldives are low-lying, built on coral atolls that rise barely above sea level. Freshwater is scarce, arable land is limited, and storms and tides are constant concerns. And yet, for centuries, Maldivians have not only survived, but prospered by turning the sea into their greatest ally. Fishing has always been central to Maldivian life, with tuna a staple food and an export traded across the Indian Ocean. The surrounding reefs provided shelter and abundance, while the islands themselves became waypoints for maritime networks. Positioned along key trade routes, the Maldives became known for cowrie shells, which were used as currency across Asia and Africa for centuries. Imagine the irony: tiny shells gathered from beaches on small islands fueling economies far larger than the islands themselves. Over time, Maldivians developed a seafaring culture, with navigation techniques that allowed them to travel across open waters without the instruments modern sailors rely upon. Even today, life in the Maldives is deeply tied to the rhythm of the sea, though rising ocean levels now pose a daunting challenge for the future of this fragile civilization. Where the Maldives are scattered and delicate, the Philippines are vast and diverse. With more than 7,000 islands, the Philippines form one of the largest archipelagos in the world. This geography has shaped its history profoundly. The islands served as stepping stones for migration and trade, a meeting place where cultures blended and adapted. Austronesian peoples, skilled in ocean navigation, first settled the islands thousands of years ago. They brought with them knowledge of farming, fishing, and boat building, creating communities that thrived in a land both fragmented and connected by the sea. The sea not only connected the islands to each other, but also to the wider world. Traders from China, India, and later the Islamic world came to exchange goods, ideas, and traditions. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the 16th century, they encountered societies that were already complex and interconnected. The Spanish influence layered Catholicism, language, and governance onto this foundation, while local traditions endured and evolved. The result today is a culture that is both distinctly Filipino and yet marked by centuries of exchange. From colourful festivals to rich culinary traditions, the Philippines embody the creativity that can flourish in a land shaped by thousands of islands. Across all these examples, certain patterns emerge. Island civilizations must constantly reckon with their boundaries. Food, wood, and fresh water are never taken for granted. Navigation is not a luxury but a necessity, for survival often depends on the ability to travel between islands or to trade with distant lands. The sea becomes both friend and foe, a provider of fish and trade routes, yet also a barrier, a stormbringer, and a reminder of fragility. What is remarkable is how these constraints often foster cultural blossoming. Scarcity breeds innovation. On Easter Island, limited resources did not prevent the creation of monumental art, but may have driven it, as the community sought cohesion and meaning. In the Maldives, scarcity of land and fresh water encouraged a deep reliance on the sea, leading to maritime skills and trade networks that belied the island's small size. In the Philippines, geography forced adaptation to diversity, producing a culture that thrives on mixture and resilience. Island civilizations also reveal the importance of storytelling. Oral traditions, songs, dances, and rituals serve as vessels of memory, binding communities together across generations. On Easter Island, chants and dances still preserve fragments of ancient history. In the Maldives, folk tales recount spirits of the sea and lessons for survival. In the Philippines, epics sung for hours tell of heroes, ancestors, and journeys across the waves. These traditions are more than entertainment. They are survival tools anchoring identity in a shifting, sometimes hostile environment. There is a certain poetry in how islands transform human culture. They take limitation and turn it into identity. They force communities to look outward, across the sea, while also grounding them in their small patches of land. They encourage both innovation and preservation, producing some of the world's most distinctive societies. Islands remind us that civilization is not defined by scale. A nation of 1,000 islands, or a community on a single volcanic rock, can leave marks on history as profound as those of vast empires. The Moai gazing across Rapa Nui, the reefs surrounding the Maldives, the bustling cities of the Philippines, each speaks of human determination to thrive against the odds. They are proof that even when space is narrow and resources thin, imagination and resilience can create civilizations that shine brightly across time. There is a certain drama in the idea of being cast away. The sea, so vast and indifferent, suddenly tosses you onto a strip of land surrounded by nothing but horizon. No harbours, no towns, no passing ships to call for help, only palm trees, rocks, and the endless rhythm of waves. For as long as humans have crossed the oceans, there have been stories of shipwrecks and survival, of people stranded far from home who must wrestle with both nature and solitude. Islands, in this sense, become both sanctuary and prison, their isolation testing every ounce of human resourcefulness. Few tales capture this better than that of Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor marooned in the early 18th century on the Juan Fernandez Islands off the coast of Chile. After an argument with his captain about the seaworthiness of their ship, Selkirk demanded to be left ashore with only a musket, tools, and some supplies. It seemed a rash decision, yet when the ship later sank, his choice turned out to be a blessing. Selkirk survived alone for more than 4 years, living off goats, fish, and wild turnips until he was finally rescued. His remarkable endurance inspired Daniel Defoe's famous novel Robinson Crusoe, published in 1719, which gave the world its archetypal castaway. Crusoe, with his salvaged tools and his solitary struggle to master the island, became a symbol of human ingenuity in the face of isolation. But not all castaway stories end in triumph. Countless sailors wrecked on remote shores never made it home. The sea can be generous in providing fish and coconuts, but it is equally merciless in denying fresh water, shelter, or rescue. Many islands lack adequate resources for survival, offering little more than a barren stretch of rock where the sun beats down by day and storms lash by night. In such places, survival depends as much on luck as on skill. Still, the romance of the castaway persists, perhaps because it touches something deep in human imagination, the idea of starting anew, stripped of society's comforts, forced to rely on wit and will. Robinson Crusoe's island may be fictional, but the fascination it inspires reflects a universal question. What would any of us do if suddenly cut off from the world? Would we build, adapt, and flourish, or falter in the face of solitude? Real-life tales often provide striking answers. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators sometimes found themselves blown off course during long voyages. A lucky few made landfall on uninhabited islands, where their skills in canoe building, fishing, and farming allowed them to establish new communities. In this way, the Pacific itself was peopled, not by planned expeditions alone, but also by chance landings that became new beginnings. To be cast away in such cases was not an end, but a genesis. For European explorers, contact with islands frequently blurred the line between discovery and disaster. The age of exploration brought ships to every corner of the ocean, and islands became critical waypoints. Yet each landfall carried risk. A sudden storm could dash a vessel against coral reefs. Unfamiliar diseases could spread in either direction, from sailors to islanders, or islanders to sailors. What began as discovery often turned into unintended tragedy. Consider the story of Pitcairn Island, most famous as the refuge of the mutineers from HMS Bounty in the late 18th century. After seizing the ship, the mutineers, led by Fletcher Christian, sought a hideout far from British reach. They settled on Pitcairn, a remote volcanic island misplotted on maps, making it nearly impossible for the Navy to locate. For years they lived in seclusion, raising families and eking out an existence from the island's meagre resources. Their society was turbulent, marked by violence and hardship, yet it endured, and descendants of the mutineers still live on Pitcairn today. Here, the interplay of castaway survival and contact with outsiders created a story that has fascinated the world for generations. Shipwreck stories are also cultural crossroads. When stranded sailors encountered local inhabitants, the outcomes varied wildly. Sometimes there was hospitality, with islanders sharing food and shelter. Other times, fear and mistrust led to conflict. In either case, contact between castaways and local populations often altered the course of history in small but meaningful ways. A single shipwreck could introduce new technologies, animals, or diseases into an island ecosystem, or it might record in oral tradition as a story of strangers arriving from the sea. The psychological side of being stranded is equally compelling. Isolation magnifies everything. A crackling fire becomes a triumph, a distant sail a torment if it drifts past without noticing. Time stretches in odd ways, with days blurring into one another. Many castaways wrote journals or carved notches to keep track of time, a small act of defiance against the endless sameness of solitude. Others turned to imagination, inventing routines or even creating companions in their minds to stave off loneliness. The idea of Friday in Robinson Crusoe, the companion Crusoe rescues and befriends, reflects not just colonial attitudes of its era, but also a deep truth. Human beings crave company, even if only as a story to tell themselves. Islands in these tales take on an almost theatrical role. They are not mere backdrops, but active participants. Some are generous, offering fruit trees, streams, and wildlife. Others are cruel, little more than barren rocks where survival is measured in days. They shape the destiny of those who land upon them, dictating what is possible and what is not. The same ocean that carries ships to safety can just as easily turn an island into a cage from which there is no escape. Despite the hardships, the stories of castaways remain oddly uplifting. They remind us of the resilience woven into human nature. Time and again, individuals faced with impossible odds have managed to endure, building shelters, crafting tools, finding food, and clinging to hope of rescue. Even when rescue never came, their legacies live on in journals, legends, and the occasional footprint left behind on an empty beach. Perhaps the enduring fascination with castaway tales comes from the tension they embody. An island is both a place of exile and of rebirth. To be stranded is to lose the world, but also to be given a new one, albeit smaller and more precarious. The castaway is both victim and pioneer, cut off yet forced to explore. And so the idea continues to resonate, whether in the true story of Selkirk, the fiction of Crusoe, or the countless survival stories since. Islands remain the stage for one of humanity's oldest dramas. What happens when we are left alone with nothing but ourselves, the sea, and a scrap of land? It is a question that keeps returning, as irresistible as the horizon itself. Some islands, rather than being places of solitude, have become bustling crossroads where the world seems to converge. Their very isolation makes them valuable, turning them into natural stepping stones across oceans and choke points along trade routes. In such places, ships from distant lands meet, goods are exchanged, and cultures intertwine. To walk the streets of an island port is to trace the currents of global history, for these small patches of land often played outsized roles in connecting continents. Singapore is perhaps the most striking modern example. Perched at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, it commands the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. For centuries, this narrow waterway has been the gateway between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, a natural funnel for trade. Long before Singapore became the gleaming metropolis of today, the island was already a hub for merchants from China, India, Arabia, and beyond. Spices, silk, and porcelain flowed through its harbours, while ideas and religions travelled with them. When the British established a colonial trading post there in the 19th century, it rapidly grew into one of the most important ports in Asia. Today, Singapore remains a global maritime giant, where container ships form steel forests in the harbour, and the hum of commerce never ceases. Its position illustrates how an island, small in size, can hold the keys to vast flows of goods and people. Zanzibar, off the coast of Tanzania, tells a different but equally compelling story. Known as the Spice Island, it was once the centre of the global clove trade, its fertile soils producing crops that were coveted across the world. But Zanzibar was also a crossroads of cultures, where Arab African, Persian and Indian influences mingled. Its stone-built capital, Stone Town, still bears the traces of this blending in its carved wooden doors, narrow alleys and bustling markets. For centuries, Zanzibar served as a hub not just for spices but also for ivory, and tragically, the slave trade. Caravans from the African interior would end their long journeys here, their goods shipped out to markets across the Indian Ocean. Today, Zanzibar's harbours are quieter, filled more with fishing boats and ferries than with galleons and dhows, but the sense of global connection remains palpable. Walk its streets and you can still smell the spices, hear the call to prayer mingling with African rhythms, and feel the layered history of a true island crossroads. Malta, sitting in the middle of the Mediterranean, has been another such crossroad for millennia. Its position between Europe and Africa, near the sea routes linking east and west, made it a coveted prize for empires. The Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Romans, Arabs, Normans and Ottomans all left their mark on the island. During the age of the Crusades, the Knights Hospitaller turned Malta into a fortress bristling with walls and bastions, a stronghold against Ottoman expansion. Centuries later, in the Second World War, Malta's strategic location once again made it a target, enduring relentless bombardment as Allied convoys sought to hold the Mediterranean. Today, its harbours are filled with yachts and ferries, but the echoes of its martial past still linger in its stone fortifications and grand harbours. Malta is an island that has always stood at the crossroads of conflict and commerce, and its history reflects both. The balance between isolation and connection is what defines these island ports. On the one hand, they are small and contained, often limited in natural resources. On the other, they thrive precisely because they are unavoidable waypoints. Ships need places to rest, resupply and trade, and islands conveniently scattered along maritime highways provide just that. Over time, these stopovers became more than mere refueling stations. They grew into cultural melting pots where languages, cuisines and traditions mingled. Imagine a sailor in the 15th century stepping off a ship in Zanzibar. The smells of cloves and cinnamon fill the air. Merchants haggle in Arabic, Swahili and Gujarati. Dhows bob in the harbour alongside European caravels. In the market you might find porcelain from China, textiles from India and beads from Venice. Each object carries a story of the journeys that brought it here. Islands like Zanzibar became living museums of global exchange long before globalization became a modern buzzword. The same holds true for Singapore. Even today, its cuisine is a testament to centuries of cultural fusion. Chinese noodles, Indian curries, Malay satays, all existing side by side. The very idea of Singaporean identity is rooted in this blending, shaped by generations of traders and settlers from across Asia and beyond. For Malta, the fusion is visible in architecture, in language, in the very stones of its cities. Maltese, the national language, is itself a hybrid, descended from Arabic but written in the Latin alphabet and sprinkled with Italian and English influences. The port does not just move goods, it reshapes culture. What makes these island ports especially intriguing is how their fortunes rose and fell with global currents. When trade routes shifted, some islands faded into obscurity. Others reinvented themselves, finding new roles as empires waxed and waned. Yet the pattern remains. Where sea lanes converge, islands become indispensable. They remind us that geography is destiny, and that even the smallest patch of land can play host to the tides of history. Beyond trade and politics, island ports also stir the imagination. They are places of encounter, where strangers meet, where stories are swapped, and where dreams of distant horizons are born. Ports have always been noisy, chaotic places. The clang of rigging, the calls of dock workers, the bustle of markets. Yet they are also places of possibility, where a ship leaving harbour could vanish into the unknown, bound for lands most could only dream of. In their essence, these ports embody the paradox of islands themselves. They are bounded by water, yet they are also windows to the world. They are isolated but never insular. Instead, they thrive on exchange, on the constant ebb and flow of people and ideas. To stand on the quays of Singapore, Zanzibar or Malta is to stand at the hinge points of history, where the currents of oceans and empires meet. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of these island ports, that even the smallest speck of land, when placed in the right position, can connect worlds. They are proof that isolation and connection are not opposites, but partners, shaping societies that are both distinct and cosmopolitan. In the end, island ports are reminders that the sea does not only divide, it also binds, weaving distant shores together through the quiet, ceaseless rhythm of trade. Step onto an island and you quickly realize that the rules of life can be very different here. Creatures that elsewhere would be ordinary take on new forms, while some evolve in directions so unusual they seem lifted from imagination. Cut off by the sea, plants and animals adapt to conditions in ways that reveal both the creativity and the limits of evolution. These are the wildlife worlds of islands, places where nature writes strange, enchanting stories on a smaller stage. Madagascar is perhaps the most famous of these worlds. Split from the African mainland nearly 90 million years ago, it became a cradle for unique evolution. Its isolation meant that animals found nowhere else could thrive, undisturbed by many of the predators and competitors that shaped life elsewhere. Lemurs are the stars of Madagascar's stage, primates that come in dozens of species, from the tiny mouse lemur, which could perch comfortably in a teacup, to the striking indri, which sings eerie calls through the forests. Unlike monkeys, lemurs never had to share their forests with aggressive competitors, so they diversified into nearly every niche available. Some became nocturnal specialists, others leapt between treetops by day, and a few even took to open ground. Nowhere else on Earth can you hear the wailing chorus of Indris or watch Siphokas dance across the forest floor in bounding hops. Madagascar's plant life is just as eccentric. Baobab trees with their swollen trunks that look as if someone planted them upside down dominate parts of the landscape. These trees store water in their massive trunks, a perfect adaptation to the island's dry seasons. Spiny forests filled with cactus-like plants show another path of survival, one that echoes desert flora but evolved independently. Together, these species create an environment that feels simultaneously familiar and alien, as if you've wandered into an alternate version of Earth's ecology. Travel far across the ocean to New Zealand, and you find another remarkable cast of characters shaped by isolation. With no native land mammals aside from bats, birds took over many of the ecological roles that mammals fill elsewhere. The kiwi is perhaps the best known, a nocturnal flightless bird with shaggy feathers, a long beak tipped with nostrils, and an endearing shyness. Kiwis lay eggs so large in proportion to their bodies that it would be the equivalent of a human giving birth to a child the size of a 5-year-old. Evolution on an island, it seems, is not shy about stretching possibilities. New Zealand also once hosted the mighty moa, giant flightless birds that could reach heights of 3 meters. With no large predators to fear, they thrived until humans arrived and hunted them to extinction. Alongside the moa lived the Haast's eagle, the largest eagle ever known, which hunted them with talons powerful enough to crush bone. It is an extraordinary reversal of expectations, a giant bird hunted by an even bigger bird of prey, all in a land without lions, wolves or tigers. Islands often produce such oddities because of 2 evolutionary trends, gigantism and dwarfism. With fewer predators, small animals may grow larger, filling ecological roles left vacant. Conversely, large species that find themselves constrained by limited resources may shrink over time. Madagascar's extinct elephant birds were towering giants, some taller than 3 meters, yet nearby islands in the Mediterranean once hosted miniature elephants barely larger than pigs. These shifts show how flexible life can be when placed within the confines of an island. Another striking pattern is the loss of flight. Birds that live on predator-free islands often give up their wings over generations. Flight requires enormous energy. and when there is no need to escape ground-based hunters, nature opts for efficiency. The dodo of Mauritius is the most famous casualty of this adaptation, a plump, flightless bird that thrived until sailors and their animals arrived. Today, New Zealand's kakapo, a large nocturnal parrot that prefers to waddle, offers a rare surviving example of this evolutionary path. It is both comical and touching to watch a kakapo strut about, utterly convinced that walking is perfectly dignified for a parrot. Island plants follow their own peculiar logic as well. With limited pollinators, some flowers evolve to attract whatever creatures are available, leading to unusual shapes and scents. On islands where strong winds are common, plants often grow low and sturdy, hugging the ground for shelter. In Hawaii, for instance, a group of plants known as the silver swords developed striking forms, spiky rosettes of silver leaves that shimmer in the sun, perfectly adapted to harsh volcanic slopes. Their ancestors were thought to be humble tarweed plants from the North American mainland, but isolation reshaped them into one of the world's most distinctive plant families. Perhaps what makes these wildlife worlds so captivating is not just their uniqueness, but their vulnerability. Isolation protects species for millennia, but it also leaves them unprepared for change. Introduced predators like rats, cats and dogs have devastated island ecosystems. Birds that never learned to fear now face extinction from creatures they never evolved to resist. Plants that once thrived without grazers are stripped bare by goats and cattle. This fragility underscores the delicate balance that allows island species to flourish. Despite these dangers, islands remain treasure troves for science. The Galapagos Islands provided Darwin with inspiration for his ideas on natural selection, and they continue to reveal new insights into evolution. Madagascar's forests still yield species unknown to science: tiny frogs, new lemurs, unusual insects. Even in the 21st century, we're still discovering life forms that evolve quietly in the shadows of isolation. Each discovery is a reminder that the Earth holds surprises, especially where the sea has kept life apart. There's also a sense of enchantment in how these animals and plants resonate with us. Lemurs with their bright eyes and gentle calls seem almost otherworldly, while the kiwi shuffling in the night feels like a relic from prehistory. To encounter these creatures is to glimpse what evolution can achieve when given a closed stage and ample time. Islands remind us that life does not follow a single script. It improvises, experiments, and sometimes produces results that defy expectation. So when we think of islands, it is worth looking beyond the beaches and cliffs to the hidden lives that thrive there. From dancing sifakas in Madagascar to waddling kiwis in New Zealand, from towering baobabs to shimmering silver swords, these wildlife worlds are nature's most imaginative experiments. They show us not only the resilience of life but also its boundless creativity, painting each island as a unique masterpiece in the gallery of Earth's biodiversity. An island can look like paradise, a stretch of green forest, birdsong echoing across lagoons, and colourful reefs just offshore. Yet beneath this beauty lies fragility. Islands are ecological gardens that flourish under special conditions, but those same conditions also make them vulnerable. A single disruption, whether from invasive species, human activity, or climate shifts, can unravel an entire ecosystem with startling speed. To understand islands is to recognise both their splendour and their precariousness. One of the defining traits of island ecosystems is their small scale. On the mainland, a species might range across thousands of kilometres, buffering itself against local disruptions. On an island, however, populations are limited to the boundaries of their territory. If a bird species exists only on one island a few dozen kilometres wide, then its entire fate depends on that narrow patch of habitat. This is why islands often host extraordinary levels of endemism but also extraordinary levels of extinction. When something goes wrong, there is nowhere else to go. History is filled with cautionary tales of what happens when outsiders arrive, often unintentionally, and disturb this delicate balance. Perhaps the most famous is the story of the dodo, the flightless bird of Mauritius. With no natural predators on its island home, the dodo evolved without fear. When sailors landed in the 17th century, they found the birds trusting and easy to catch. Rats, pigs, and monkeys brought along by ships devoured their eggs. Within decades, a species that had thrived for millennia was gone. The dodo's fate has since become a symbol of how quickly island life can collapse. But the dodo is far from alone. Across the Pacific, the arrival of Polynesian settlers and later Europeans introduced new animals that transformed landscapes. Rats, stowaways on ships, have been especially destructive, eating seeds, chicks, and insects that never evolved defences. Cats brought for companionship or pest control turned into lethal predators, wiping out ground-nesting birds. Goats, introduced as a ready food source, stripped vegetation from slopes, leaving bare rock and erosion in their wake. In each case, the newcomers flourished precisely because the local ecosystems were unprepared for them. Plants, too, can be invasive. The introduction of species that grow faster or spread more aggressively than native plants can smother island flora. On islands like Hawaii, non-native grasses and shrubs have crowded out unique local plants, altering fire regimes and nutrient cycles. What begins as a few seeds in the ballast of a ship can end with entire landscapes transformed beyond recognition. It is not only invasive species that strain island systems. Human settlement itself places enormous pressure on limited resources. Fresh water is often scarce, soils thin, and agricultural land minimal. In places like Easter Island, deforestation in the past led to soil erosion and food shortages, a reminder that natural limits cannot be ignored. Today, rising populations on many islands magnify these challenges. Tourism, while economically vital, can also strain water supplies, create waste problems, and put pressure on fragile ecosystems like coral reefs. Climate change adds yet another layer of vulnerability. Small islands, especially low-lying atolls, face the looming threat of rising seas. Entire communities in the Maldives, Tuvalu and Kiribati worry that their homelands may vanish within generations. Saltwater intrusion threatens agriculture, while stronger storms can devastate infrastructure. For island wildlife, shifting temperatures and ocean acidification endanger reefs, nesting grounds, and food sources. Coral bleaching events driven by warming seas are already stripping colour and life from some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Yet despite this fragility, islands are not simply stories of decline. They're also places of resilience and restoration. In recent decades, conservationists have developed remarkable strategies to heal island ecosystems. One approach is the eradication of invasive species. On several islands, careful campaigns have removed rats or goats entirely, allowing native plants and birds to rebound. The return of seabird colonies to islands once overrun by predators is a powerful testament to what is possible. Reforestation projects too are bringing back landscapes once stripped bare. On Rodriguez Island in the Indian Ocean, a once devastated forest has been painstakingly restored by local communities who planted native trees and nurtured them back to life. Now rare birds and reptiles are returning. In New Zealand, predator-free sanctuaries have been established on offshore islands, where endangered birds like the kakapo and little spotted kiwi are given safe havens to recover. These examples show that while islands may be fragile gardens, they can also be carefully tended back to health. There is also a lesson in humility to be found here. The very features that make islands enchanting, their remoteness, their uniqueness, their sense of being apart, are the same features that demand careful stewardship. An island cannot absorb unlimited disturbance. It requires balance, respect, and often restraint. Human actions, whether introducing a new species or felling too many trees, have consequences magnified by scale. Perhaps that is why islands resonate so deeply with us as symbols. They represent both beauty and vulnerability, independence and dependence. To walk on an island is to be reminded of limits. There is only so much land, so much water, so much life it can hold. But it is also to be reminded of possibility, for within those limits entire worlds flourish. The challenge now is to recognise how fragile these gardens are and to act with the care they deserve. Islands show us in miniature what the whole planet faces: finite resources, delicate balances, and the need for coexistence. If we can learn to protect these small worlds, perhaps we can also learn how to tend the larger island we all share: Earth itself. Close your eyes and picture a tropical island. Chances are the image comes quickly: swaying palms, soft sand beneath bare feet, turquoise water so clear it feels unreal. A hammock might be strung between two trees, a coconut drink balanced on your lap, and time itself seems to have slowed to a drowsy crawl. This vision is deeply rooted in our collective imagination, a symbol of paradise that has been painted in travel posters, novels, and daydreams for centuries. But how did this idea take hold, and how does it compare with the reality of life on tropical islands? The palm tree is perhaps the most enduring icon of this dream. Tall, slender, and crowned with fronds that rustle like whispers in the wind, palms feel like nature's invitation to relax. Yet they are more than decoration. Coconut palms in particular have been lifelines for island communities. Every part of the coconut has a use: the meat for food, the water for hydration, the husks for rope and fuel, the shells for bowls. The tree itself is called the tree of life in many cultures, for it provides so much from so little. For outsiders, palms symbolize leisure and luxury, but for islanders they represent survival and resourcefulness. Coconuts themselves carry an astonishing story. They can float for months across the ocean, their tough shells protecting the seed inside. This ability allowed them to colonize coastlines across the tropics, riding the waves like natural castaways. The spread of coconuts became intertwined with human migration. Seafaring peoples carried them intentionally to new islands, ensuring food and drink at future landfalls. Thus, the humble coconut became a global traveller, shaping the very image of tropical paradise. The hammock is another element of the dream. Few things capture relaxation more completely than the gentle sway of a hammock strung between two trees, perhaps with the sea lapping nearby. The hammock's origins, however, lie not in leisure but in practicality. Indigenous peoples of the Caribbean and Central America wove hammocks from plant fibres as safe, elevated beds. Suspended above the ground, they offered protection from snakes, insects, and damp soil. European sailors later adopted them for use on ships, where space was limited and sleeping off the floor was both cleaner and safer. Over time, the hammock transformed from necessity to symbol, becoming shorthand for rest, vacation, and escape. Behind this romantic image lies a more complicated reality. Life on a tropical island can be idyllic, but it's rarely effortless. Fresh water may be scarce, storms can be fierce, and the same sun that warms the beach can also scorch crops. Mosquitoes and other pests can make life uncomfortable, and isolation can limit access to medicine, education, or trade. For communities living on small atolls, the challenges are constant. Building houses on shifting sand, finding reliable food, and preparing for cyclones that can sweep across the ocean with devastating force. Even the beaches that draw visitors from across the world are not always the pristine stretches portrayed in brochures. Sand is a product of erosion, created over millennia by waves grinding rock and coral into powder. In many places, beaches are seasonal, appearing in calm months and vanishing during storms. Some islands struggle with erosion so severe that entire villages must be moved inland. The turquoise waters so beloved by tourists may conceal coral reefs that are bleaching under rising sea temperatures or being damaged by overfishing and careless development. Tourism itself is a double-edged sword for tropical islands. On one hand, it brings vital income, supporting livelihoods in places where other industries may be limited. On the other, it can strain fragile ecosystems, overwhelm water supplies, and transform local cultures into performances for visitors. The same paradise that outsiders dream of often masks the hard work required by island communities to maintain both tradition and modernity. And yet, the dream persists, perhaps because it taps into something universal, the longing for escape. Islands represent a boundary from the rest of the world, a place where obligations fade and the sea draws a protective circle around life. The notion of paradise has long been tied to separation, a garden apart, a haven untouched. Tropical islands embody this vision more vividly than almost any other place. Writers and artists have played a large role in shaping the ideal. Early explorers returned to Europe with tales of lush islands where fruit hung in abundance and the air was thick with fragrance. Painters and poets transformed these reports into visions of earthly Eden. In the 20th century, film and advertising turned the palm-fringed island into the ultimate escape, selling everything from rum to holiday packages. A beach with swaying palms became shorthand for relaxation, freedom and indulgence. At the same time, islands themselves have contributed to their mystique. Walk along a quiet lagoon at sunset, the sky glowing orange, and it is difficult not to feel as if you're standing in paradise. The combination of warm air, gentle surf, and vivid colours is intoxicating. Islands do not have to try very hard to enchant. Their scale, their separation, their sense of enclosure by the sea, all combine to heighten the impression that here, at least for a while, one can step outside of time. Of course, paradise means different things to different people. For some, it is the thrill of diving among coral reefs alive with darting fish. For others, it is sipping a drink beneath the palms with nothing on the schedule. For islanders themselves, paradise may be something more practical. A good harvest, a safe storm season, children growing up strong and healthy. The romantic image is only one layer, and beneath it lies the lived reality of communities who work tirelessly to sustain life on their slender strips of land. Perhaps that is the true fascination of tropical islands, the tension between dream and reality. They are both paradise and challenge, both idyllic and precarious. To visit them is to glimpse a beauty that feels timeless, but also to recognize the effort required to preserve it. The palm trees and hammocks are real, but so are the storms and the scarcity. The coconut may be a symbol of leisure for some, but for others it remains the cornerstone of survival. And so the dream continues to shimmer, part truth, part imagination. Islands remain symbols of escape, promising that somewhere out there, across the water, lies a place where life is simpler, slower, and sweeter. Even if reality complicates the picture, the idea of paradise is powerful enough to endure. Perhaps that is why tropical islands appear again and again in our fantasies. They are not just places but promises of rest, of renewal, and of the possibility that the world still holds spaces where life feels like a dream. Not every island greets you with swaying palms and warm lagoons. Some rise bleak and bare from the sea, their surfaces scoured by wind, ice or fire. These are the harsh islands, where survival is not a given but an achievement, and where life clings with remarkable tenacity to conditions that seem designed to drive it away. They remind us that islands are not always paradises. Sometimes they are tests. Take Surtsey, a volcanic island that erupted into being off the coast of Iceland in 1963. At first, it was nothing but smoking cinders and jagged black rock, a landscape so alien that it seemed impossible anything could live there. Yet within weeks, seabirds began to visit, and seeds carried by wind and waves started to take root. Over the years, mosses, lichens, and flowering plants appeared, followed by insects and eventually larger animals. Surtsey became a living experiment in colonization, showing how quickly life can establish itself even in the most forbidding conditions. Its creation was dramatic, but its transformation has been subtle. A reminder that even on the harshest islands, life finds a foothold. Contrast that with the bleak Arctic islands, where cold and wind reign supreme. Places like Svalbard, lying deep within the Arctic Circle, are inhospitable for much of the year, with polar nights stretching for months and temperatures plunging far below freezing. Yet even here, life endures. Polar bears roam the ice, seabirds nest in towering cliffs, and hardy plants carpet the tundra during the brief summer. Human settlement has always been precarious. The town of Longyearbyen, one of the northernmost communities on Earth, survives only through modern infrastructure and constant resupply. Step outside the town without caution, and the Arctic quickly reminds you who is in charge. Other islands are harsh not because of cold, but because of barrenness. Some volcanic outcrops provide little more than jagged stone rising from the sea. Ascension Island in the Atlantic was once a dry, desolate place, with little vegetation and scarce fresh water. In the 19th century, a project led by naturalists, including Charles Darwin, attempted to transform it by planting trees and shrubs brought from across the world. Over time, the island developed a kind of artificial forest, creating a microclimate that trapped moisture and encouraged greenery. It is an example of how even inhospitable islands can be altered by human intervention, though whether for better or worse is still debated. In the South Atlantic lies Tristan da Cunha, often called the most remote inhabited island on Earth. Surrounded by thousands of kilometres of ocean, its volcanic slopes rise steeply from the sea, leaving only a narrow band of habitable land. Life there is dominated by isolation and weather. The island's few hundred residents have built a close-knit community, relying on fishing and limited farming, but resupply ships may be months apart. In bad weather, the harbour can be impassable for weeks. For those who live there, survival is not just about food and shelter, but about resilience in the face of remoteness itself. The Aleutian Islands, stretching like a broken chain from Alaska toward Russia, present another example of harshness. Here, cold waters clash with restless volcanoes, creating a landscape of fog, storms, and seismic activity. Seafarers have long dreaded these islands, where sudden squalls can capsize boats and earthquakes rumble beneath the sea. Yet for indigenous Aleut communities, these islands were home, their culture shaped by the challenge of navigating such an unforgiving environment. Their survival depended on intimate knowledge of weather patterns, marine life, and seasonal shifts, a testament to human adaptation in places where outsiders often faltered. Harsh islands are not always polar or volcanic. Some are simply too small, too exposed, or too dry to easily sustain life. Consider Clipperton Island in the eastern Pacific, a ring-shaped atoll with little fresh water and almost no soil. Once briefly settled for guano mining in the early 20th century, it became infamous for the suffering of its inhabitants when resupply ceased. Diseases, shortages, and isolation took their toll, and the attempt to live there ended in tragedy. Today, it remains uninhabited except for occasional scientific expeditions, a reminder that not every island can be bent to human will. Even among these bleak outposts, there are flashes of resilience. Arctic seabirds crowd nesting cliffs in their millions, filling the air with cries and guano. Penguins thrive on the rocky shores of sub-Antarctic islands, braving icy seas to raise their young. Albatrosses soar for thousands of kilometres to return to desolate specks of land where they breed, their fidelity to such remote places almost poetic. Harsh islands, though forbidding, often play vital roles as sanctuaries for wildlife. Their very inhospitality to humans leaves room for other species to thrive. Yet human fascination with these difficult places never fades. Explorers have long been drawn to islands where survival seems improbable, perhaps because they serve as symbols of endurance. To plant a flag on a windswept rock in the Southern Ocean, or to build a base on an Arctic outcrop, is to demonstrate that humanity can persist even where nature resists. Scientific stations dot places like South Georgia and Jan Mayen, where researchers study glaciers, penguins, and weather patterns. These outposts are not permanent homes, but they represent humanity's determination to reach even the most hostile edges of the map. There is also a certain austere beauty to these islands. The sight of black volcanic cliffs rising sheer from a silver sea, or of icebergs drifting past a lonely shore, has a stark grandeur. The silence of a frozen island, broken only by the wind, carries its own kind of peace. To visit such a place is to step outside of comfort and into humility, to be reminded of both the power of nature and the limits of human control. Ultimately, harsh islands tell us as much about resilience as they do about difficulty. Life finds a way, whether it is moss spreading across cooling lava, seabirds nesting on wave-battered cliffs, or small communities enduring isolation with creativity and determination. These islands may never be dream destinations in the sense of hammocks and coconuts, but they hold a fascination all their own. They are reminders that even in the most improbable conditions, the story of survival continues, quietly, stubbornly, and often beautifully. Some islands are less about coconuts and palm trees and more about power. To the casual eye, a rocky outcrop in the middle of nowhere may look like little more than a bird sanctuary. To nations, however, it might be a valuable stake in surrounding seas, a foothold for military bases, or a symbol of sovereignty that cannot be surrendered. Islands may be small, but in politics they loom large, shaping borders, sparking disputes, and influencing the flow of global trade. A striking example lies in the South China Sea, where scattered reefs and tiny islands have become the focus of intense international rivalry. The Spratly and Paracel Islands, many no larger than football fields, are claimed in overlapping patches by multiple countries, including China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. Why such interest in bits of land barely above sea level? Because international law grants nations exclusive economic rights to waters extending 200 nautical miles from their territory. Control an island, and you control the surrounding sea, along with its fisheries, shipping lanes, and potential oil and gas reserves. To cement these claims, some countries have built artificial islands atop reefs, complete with runways and radar stations. The scene might look surreal, military bases rising from what was once coral and sand, but it highlights how islands, however small, can tip the balance of power. Further north, Japan and Russia remain locked in dispute over the Kuril Islands, a chain stretching between Hokkaido and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. At the close of the Second World War, Soviet forces occupied 4 islands at the southern end of the chain. Japan has claimed them ever since, calling them the Northern Territories. The disagreement has persisted for decades, preventing the two nations from signing a formal peace treaty to officially end the war. For the residents of these islands, history is not abstract. It has defined who governs them and whether they can return to ancestral homes. In the Mediterranean, another set of contested rocks makes headlines from time to time, the islet of Perejil, little more than a scrubby outcrop off the Moroccan coast. In 2002, Spanish and Moroccan troops briefly faced off over this barren piece of land. The crisis was diffused peacefully, but it illustrates how even the smallest island can become a spark for national pride and international tension. Geography may be stubbornly physical, but politics is about perception, and no nation wishes to appear weak over territory, however trivial it might seem. Islands also serve as strategic outposts, projecting power across oceans. Britain's control of Gibraltar, though technically a peninsula, functions much like an island fortress at the mouth of the Mediterranean. During the Age of Empire, islands were jewels in naval strategy. Malta served as a vital British base, guarding sea routes to India and the Suez Canal. In the Pacific, Guam and Hawaii became key American strongholds, positioned perfectly for both defense and trade. The Second World War made this reality brutally clear, as island battles like Midway, Iwo Jima, and Guadalcanal determined the course of the conflict. Possessing islands meant controlling airfields, supply lines, and the movement of fleets. Some islands even act as symbols of endurance. Consider the Falkland Islands, a windswept archipelago in the South Atlantic. Claimed by both Britain and Argentina, the dispute erupted into war in 1982. Though Britain retained control, the conflict demonstrated how passionately nations will fight over faraway islands. Today, the Falklands remain home to a small but resilient community, while also serving as a reminder that sovereignty over islands can ignite conflicts out of proportion to their size. There are also islands that exist less as homes than as markers on a map. Rockall, a lonely granite stack in the North Atlantic, is claimed by the United Kingdom, but also eyed by Ireland, Denmark and Iceland for the economic rights it might confer. The rock itself is uninhabitable, exposed, storm-lashed, and barely large enough to stand on, yet its potential influence over surrounding waters makes it a point of contention. It is a strange irony that the fate of fish and oil beneath the sea may hinge on who owns a barren rock above it. Political islands are not always disputed, though. Some have become valuable tools of diplomacy. The island of Cyprus, divided since 1974 between Greek and Turkish communities, has long been a focus of negotiation, peacekeeping, and delicate compromise. Though it remains unresolved, Cyprus shows how islands can act as microcosms of larger conflicts, where local tensions reflect broader regional rivalries. The significance of islands in politics also extends to environmental questions. As seas rise, low-lying islands face the possibility of disappearing altogether. Nations like Tuvalu and the Maldives argue that if their islands sink beneath the waves, their maritime rights and even their statehood could be threatened. International law is still grappling with how to handle this unprecedented challenge. Can a nation exist without land? Can sovereignty float on memories and coordinates alone? In this sense, islands force the world to confront questions at the very edges of law and identity. Even in peacetime, islands hold symbolic weight. They can embody national pride, serve as gateways for trade, or anchor distant territories. They are the dots on maps that draw lines of influence across oceans, their importance often far greater than their size. Nations may rise and fall, but the scramble for islands continues, shaped by the enduring fact that geography dictates opportunity. What all of this reveals is that islands are never just islands. They are footholds, markers, symbols, and prizes. Their political value lies not only in what they are but in what they represent: security, resources, prestige, and power. A speck of rock may seem insignificant to the eye, but in the ledger of nations it can carry the weight of history. So next time you glance at a globe and notice a dot in the sea, remember, that dot may be shaping alliances, fueling disputes, or anchoring the flow of trade across half the planet. For better or worse, the politics of islands prove that size is no measure of significance, and that even the smallest outcrop can ripple across the world stage. Islands may be surrounded by water, but culturally they are rarely sealed off. Instead, many islands have long served as meeting points where languages, traditions, and cuisines from far corners of the world have blended into something new. The result is often a vibrant melting pot of culture, where the sea does not just isolate but also connects, bringing people together in ways that give rise to unique identities. One of the clearest expressions of this blending is Creole culture. The word Creole has different meanings in different places, but at its heart it describes cultures born from contact, where European, African, indigenous, and Asian influences mingled in ports and plantations. On islands like Mauritius, Réunion, and the Caribbean archipelagos, new languages emerged, rooted in colonial tongues like French, Spanish, or Portuguese, but enriched with words, rhythms, and structures from African and indigenous languages. These Creole languages are living testaments to history, born out of necessity and creativity as people of diverse backgrounds forged ways to communicate. Today they are more than practical tools, they are proud markers of identity, celebrated in literature, music, and everyday life. Food tells the story just as clearly. Take the Caribbean, where the cuisines of Jamaica, Trinidad, and Martinique bear traces of Africa, India, Europe, and indigenous traditions. Jerk seasoning, with its fiery blend of spices, speaks of both African roots and local adaptation. Doubles, a Trinidadian street food made with curried chickpeas wrapped in fried bread, reveal the imprint of Indian migrants. In Mauritius, Chinese noodles share menus with Creole curries and French pastries, a reflection of centuries of layered migration. An island meal is rarely one flavour alone. It is a dialogue on a plate, the blending of oceans and continents made edible. Music is another domain where island cultures shine with hybridity. In Jamaica, reggae and later dancehall carried African rhythms fused with European instruments, spreading across the globe with an unmistakable island pulse. The steel pan, born in Trinidad and Tobago, transformed discarded oil drums into instruments capable of astonishing melody and rhythm. In the Indian Ocean, Sega music of Mauritius and Réunion combines African drumming traditions with European melodies, producing rhythms that invite both reflection and dance. And in Cape Verde, the Morna genre weaves Portuguese fado melancholy with African rhythms, giving voice to themes of longing, exile, and the sea. Island music often carries the ocean's rhythm, but its heart beats with a blend of influences from every shore that touched it. Storytelling too reflects this rich mixing. On islands, oral traditions often preserve fragments from multiple cultures, retold and reshaped across generations. In the Caribbean, Anansi the spider, a trickster figure from West African folklore, became a beloved character in island tales, adapting to new landscapes while carrying the echoes of an ancestral homeland. In the Pacific, chants and epics recount the long voyages of Polynesian navigators, blending myth with memory of real journeys. On the Indian Ocean islands, folk stories tell of spirits that guard the seas, blending African, Malagasy, and European influences into shared folklore. These narratives are not fixed relics. They evolve with each telling, reflecting the ever-changing mosaic of island life. The cultural blending of islands often arises from necessity. Small populations mean that survival depends on cooperation, trade, and exchange. When new groups arrive, whether as colonizers, traders, migrants, or enslaved peoples, their traditions do not remain separate for long. Instead, they combine into a patchwork stitched together by daily life. A festival might mix Catholic saints with African drumming and indigenous rituals. A language might borrow words for tools from one tongue, numbers from another, and grammar from a third. Out of such mixtures emerges something distinct, something no single culture could have produced alone. This does not mean the process was always harmonious. Many island societies carry painful histories of slavery, indenture, and colonization. Creole cultures in particular arose under conditions of hardship as people from different backgrounds were forced into contact. Yet even in such circumstances, resilience and creativity turned cultural collision into cultural creation. Out of suffering came strength, and out of fragmentation came new forms of unity. Today, these hybrid cultures stand as evidence of endurance and innovation. In language, food, music, and ritual, island identities often thrive on celebrating mixture. Carnival in the Caribbean, with its kaleidoscope of costumes, masks, calypso music, and parades, is a festival that embodies the joy of blending traditions. It has roots in European pre-Lenten celebrations, African masquerades, and local creativity, fused into an exuberant display that is now exported around the world. On islands in the Indian Ocean, colourful Sega dances performed on the beach at night bring together communities in shared rhythm, transcending origins to become something entirely local. Even architecture and urban design reflect this cultural stew. In places like Zanzibar's Stone Town, winding alleys reveal carved wooden doors influenced by Arab, Indian, and Swahili styles. In New Orleans, Itself, once an island settlement before the swamps around it were drained, Creole townhouses mix French, Spanish and Caribbean influences, their balconies spilling with ironwork and flowers. On many islands, culture is literally built into the walls, streets and public squares, where influences collide and settle into enduring forms. The sea itself plays a central role in shaping this mixing. Oceans are not just barriers, but highways, carrying ideas as well as goods. Sailors, merchants and migrants brought stories, instruments, recipes, and customs with them. An island harbour might host ships from 4 continents in a single season, each leaving behind traces of language and culture. Over time, those traces accumulate, creating a richness of diversity that belies the island's small size. Today, globalization might seem to blur cultural differences everywhere, but islands still preserve their distinct voices. The small scale of island societies often strengthens cultural identity, making traditions more visible and cherished. A dance performed on a village square, a market filled with spices, a lullaby sung in Creole. These are threads that bind communities together, passed along not just as heritage but as living practice. The cultural melting pots of islands teach us an important lesson. Identity is not about purity, but about adaptation. By embracing new influences, island cultures have created something vibrant, resilient, and deeply human. Their music, food, and stories resonate far beyond their shores, proof that creativity thrives at crossroads. So when we think of islands, let us not only imagine solitude or isolation. Many islands are not closed worlds, but open ones, where the sea serves as a bridge and diversity is celebrated as strength. They are reminders that cultural richness often comes not from separation but from exchange, and that some of the most colourful tapestries are woven on the smallest of looms. The very qualities that make islands enchanting, their small scale, their closeness to the sea, their sense of being apart, also make them vulnerable. For centuries, island communities have balanced carefully with their environments, drawing sustenance from narrow strips of land and surrounding waters. Today, however, many of those fragile balances are being tested as never before. Rising seas, shifting climates, and the pressures of modern tourism are reshaping the future of islands, leaving questions about how these worlds within worlds will endure. One of the most immediate threats is the rising of the ocean itself. Low-lying atolls in the Pacific and Indian Oceans sit only a few meters above sea level, their beaches and villages hugging narrow rims of sand and coral. For countries like Tuvalu, Kiribati and the Maldives, the difference between survival and submersion may come down to a single meter of sea level rise. Saltwater intrusion is already creeping into freshwater wells, poisoning crops and making agriculture more difficult. Homes that once seemed secure are now battered by higher tides and stronger storms, forcing communities to adapt in ways that test both ingenuity and spirit. For some, the prospect of relocation is not a distant theory but a looming reality. Tourism, often celebrated as the lifeblood of island economies, is a double-edged sword. The same beaches, reefs and forests that draw visitors are the very ecosystems most at risk from overuse. Resorts require fresh water in places where supplies are scarce, and development can strain fragile coastal environments. Coral reefs, battered by warming seas, are also damaged by careless anchoring, sunscreen chemicals, and the sheer weight of visitors. Paradoxically, tourism that depends on natural beauty can accelerate its decline. Yet for many island nations, tourism is the main source of income, leaving them with little choice but to walk the tightrope between preservation and exploitation. Climate change adds another layer of complexity. Shifting weather patterns affect rainfall, making droughts more common on some islands, while others face increased flooding. Warmer oceans disrupt fish stocks, threatening both livelihoods and food security. Storms are intensifying, with hurricanes and cyclones growing more destructive as they draw energy from warmer waters. In recent years, islands across the Caribbean have endured hurricanes of unprecedented strength, tearing apart infrastructure and leaving scars that take years to heal. For small economies with limited resources, rebuilding after such devastation is an uphill struggle. But the threats are not only physical, they're also cultural. Many island societies are deeply rooted in place, with traditions, songs and stories tied to particular landscapes. When rising seas erase a shoreline, it is not just a loss of land but of heritage. A burial ground submerged, a fishing ground ruined, a village forced inland. These are ruptures that ripple through identity. Islanders often speak of their cultures as inseparable from their geography, and the idea of losing home to the sea carries both emotional and existential weight. Can a nation exist without its islands? What happens when a homeland becomes memory? Yet the story is not only one of loss. Across the world, island communities are responding with creativity and resilience. In the Maldives, architects and engineers are experimenting with floating structures and artificial islands designed to withstand rising seas. In Kiribati, leaders have purchased land abroad as a potential refuge, even as they continue to fight for preservation at home. In the Caribbean, efforts to restore mangroves and coral reefs are being used as natural defences against storms and erosion. These initiatives show that islanders are not passive victims but active innovators, confronting challenges with a blend of tradition and modern science. There are also remarkable examples of communities using their cultural strength to amplify their voices. Pacific Island nations have become leaders in climate diplomacy, speaking with moral authority on the global stage. Despite their small size, their testimony resonates. Those who contribute least to greenhouse gas emissions are suffering first and most acutely from their effects. The image of tiny islands standing before vast nations demanding action has become a powerful symbol of justice in the climate era. The irony is that islands, long seen as idyllic retreats, now serve as early warning systems for the planet. What happens to atolls in the Pacific or deltas in the Indian Ocean foreshadows challenges that coasts everywhere may face. Rising seas and intensifying storms are not island problems alone. They are global issues magnified by the small scale of islands. In this sense, to pay attention to the plight of islands is to glimpse the future of the wider world. Even as they face these threats, islands retain their allure. Tourists continue to arrive in search of paradise. Artists and writers continue to dream of them as havens, and locals continue to nurture the deep connection between land, sea, and culture. Perhaps what draws us to islands is precisely this mix of fragility and resilience. They remind us that beauty is rarely permanent, and that survival often requires adaptation. The uncertain future of islands is a sobering thought, but it is not without hope. History shows that island communities have always adapted to challenges, whether through navigation, resource management, or cultural fusion. The difference today is the scale and speed of the pressures they face. Will ingenuity keep pace? Will global action arrive in time? These are questions that extend beyond islands themselves, touching the fate of coastlines, cultures, and ecosystems across the Earth. So the next time you imagine a palm-fringed shore, think not only of hammocks and coconuts, but also of seawalls, mangrove roots, and communities working tirelessly to safeguard their future. Paradise, it seems, is more complicated than it looks, but it is precisely in that complexity, the tension between vulnerability and resilience, that islands speak most powerfully to the human story. They show us that survival, like beauty, is rarely effortless, but always worth striving for. There is something irresistible about the idea of an island as a retreat, a place where the noise of the world falls away and only the rhythm of waves and wind remains. For centuries, islands have called to poets, painters, philosophers, and dreamers, offering not just physical distance but a kind of mental clarity. To stand surrounded on all sides by water is to inhabit a natural boundary, a gentle reminder that here at least life can be contained and simplified. Writers have long answered this call. The poet Lord Byron spent time in Greece, drawn to the islands of the Aegean for both inspiration and escape. Herman Melville found in the South Pacific Islands the seeds of adventure that would later shape his novels, from tales of seafaring to the epic of Moby Dick. Even Robert Louis Stevenson, whose Treasure Island helped cement the island as a place of literary romance, chose to live out his final years in Samoa, captivated by the slower rhythms of island life. For these authors, the sea did not just divide, it framed a stage upon which solitude and creativity could flourish. Artists too have found themselves drawn to islands. Paul Gauguin's paintings of Tahiti, though entangled with the complexities of colonialism and fantasy, remain iconic depictions of island light and colour. The vibrancy of his canvases reflected his fascination with the purity he believed he found in the tropics, a sharp contrast to the industrialised Europe he left behind. More recently, artists continue to retreat to islands for residencies or inspiration, their palettes shaped by the intense hues of sky, water and vegetation that seem to glow with unusual intensity when surrounded by the sea. But it's not only famous figures who feel this magnetic pull. Islands have a universal appeal as places of retreat. Something about being bounded by water makes time feel different. Days stretch longer, perhaps because there are fewer distractions, fewer roads leading endlessly onward. On an island, you can walk from one shore to another and know you have crossed a world in miniature. The finite boundaries create a sense of intimacy and focus. Solitude here is not loneliness, but rather a space to breathe, to reflect, and to simply exist. The psychological effect of water surrounding land cannot be underestimated. Oceans form a protective moat, a barrier that signals separation from the bustle of the mainland. That separation has long been equated with peace. Ancient monastic traditions recognized this, establishing communities on islands where the isolation aided contemplation. The island of Iona in Scotland, for instance, became a centre of Christian learning in the early medieval period precisely because its remoteness created an atmosphere suited to reflection and study. The same impulse can be seen in Buddhist island monasteries scattered across Asia, where water serves as a natural frame for silence. For some, the island represents freedom from the expectations of society. The poet W. H. Auden once wrote that islands can only exist if we have loved in mainland ignorance. To him, the island was a place where one could redefine oneself, where the pressures of the wider world were suspended. This idea has echoed through literature, from the castaway stories of the 18th century to the romanticised tropical getaways of the 20th. In each, the island serves as both setting and metaphor, a place where solitude is not exile but possibility. Dreamers often imagine islands as blank slates. Because they are cut off, they seem ready to be inscribed with new stories, free from the clutter of the past. Utopian thinkers frequently placed their ideal societies on islands, from Thomas More's Utopia to countless later visions. The sea around the island functioned as both wall and shield, keeping corruption at bay and allowing new orders to flourish. Even today, tech entrepreneurs and visionaries occasionally propose building experimental societies on artificial islands, chasing the dream of solitude as a canvas for innovation. Of course, solitude on an island is not always idyllic. Real life brings practical challenges, limited supplies, storms, and sometimes the press of too much quiet. But the allure persists precisely because the imagination smooths over those rough edges. In daydreams, the island is always gentle, waves lapping calmly, palm trees rustling, no bills to pay, no phones to ring. Even barren islands can be idealized as symbols of purity, places where one is stripped of complication and returned to essentials. The appeal is not only in escaping others, but also in connecting more deeply with nature. On islands, the closeness of the sea is inescapable. Its tides set the rhythm of daily life. Its presence creates a sense of scale, reminding the solitary visitor that they are small, yet connected to something vast. Writers have described this feeling as humbling, artists as inspiring, and dreamers as comforting. To be alone on an island is to feel simultaneously insignificant and held, like a single pebble embraced by an infinite shore. The call of solitude is also tied to sound. Islands can be astonishingly quiet, free of the constant hum of traffic and industry. Instead, there is the hush of wind, the cry of seabirds, and the pulse of waves against the shore. Many who retreat to islands speak of this soundscape as deeply restorative, a kind of natural lullaby that clears the mind. For a writer wrestling with words or a painter searching for colour, such quiet can be the very condition that makes creation possible. Even in the modern age, when islands are more connected by planes and ferries, they retain their aura of remoteness. A short flight may deliver you to an island, but the feeling of distance remains as soon as you see the water spread around it. That psychological separation is powerful. It transforms even a weekend trip into a retreat, a symbolic crossing from the clutter of life to the simplicity of being enclosed by the sea. In the end, the call of solitude that islands carry is not about isolation for its own sake. It is about the promise of renewal, of stepping outside the familiar long enough to see it more clearly. It is about the peace of boundaries, the comfort of knowing that life here is framed by shores that hold you in. For writers, artists and dreamers, that promise has always been irresistible. To answer the call of an island is to listen to the sea whispering, "Slow down, breathe, and let the world wait a while." An island on its own can feel like a world apart, but string a handful together and something altogether different emerges. Chains of islands, or archipelagos, have their own geography, their own rhythm, and their own personality. They are like beads on a necklace cast across the sea, each one distinct yet linked by shared history, currents, and geology. From the sprawling sweep of Indonesia to the sunny Caribbean, archipelagos remind us that unity and diversity can sit side by side, shaped by water yet tied together by invisible threads. Indonesia is perhaps the most dramatic example of an archipelago's scale. With more than 17,000 islands, it is the largest island nation on Earth, stretching across the equator like a vast maritime bridge between Asia and Australia. Its islands range from the massive Java, Sumatra and Borneo to tiny specks barely large enough for a few palm trees. The geography of Indonesia is the product of restless tectonics, where the Pacific, Eurasian, and Indo-Australian plates converge. Volcanoes punctuate the chain, their eruptions giving rise to fertile soils that support some of the world's densest populations. The diversity here is staggering. Hundreds of languages, countless cultural traditions and ecosystems that range from rainforests filled with orangutans to reefs teeming with fish. Yet despite this variety, the islands are bound together by shared seas and centuries of trade. The very idea of Indonesia as a nation is proof that an archipelago can be more than scattered pieces. It can be a coherent whole. In the Pacific, the Philippines presents another example of archipelagic unity and diversity. With more than 7,000 islands, it too is defined by a scattering of land across the sea. The Philippines sits along the Pacific Ring of Fire, so volcanoes and earthquakes are constant companions. Its islands differ in size, culture and language, yet they form a nation bound by shared identity. Much like Indonesia, the Philippines demonstrates how chains of islands create natural hubs of trade, migration, and cultural fusion. The sea that separates each island also connects them, turning isolation into interaction. Move westward, and the Aegean Sea reveals a different pattern, dotted with hundreds of islands that form a patchwork of history. The Cyclades, the Dodecanese, and the Spreaders each cluster like stars in constellations, their proximity fostering centuries of navigation and cultural exchange. Ancient Greek sailors crisscrossed these waters, carrying ideas, goods, and stories that shaped Western civilization. Here, the geography of archipelagos became the geography of myth, with islands providing stages for legends of gods and heroes. Even today, the islands retain their individual charm, whitewashed villages, olive groves and ruins, while still being part of a collective landscape that is unmistakably Greek. Further west still, the Caribbean offers a very different but equally distinctive archipelago. Stretching in a graceful arc from Cuba to Trinidad, these islands form the boundary between the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Their origins are as varied as their cultures, some volcanic, like the islands of the Lesser Antilles, others the product of ancient reefs, like the Bahamas. Historically, the Caribbean became a crossroads of global exchange, where indigenous peoples, European colonizers, African enslaved communities, and later migrants from Asia all left their mark. The result is a region of extraordinary cultural fusion, with languages, cuisines, and music that reflect centuries of mingling. Despite the differences between Cuba, Jamaica, Barbados, and dozens more, there is a unity in the Caribbean spirit, a rhythm carried in its music, its festivals, and its sense of resilience. Archipelagos also exist on smaller scales, sometimes forming patterns that seem almost artistic. The Maldives, in the Indian Ocean, is an archipelago of coral atolls strung out like pearls on a necklace, their lagoons glowing turquoise from above. Each atoll is a ring of life, fragile and low-lying, yet together they create a nation that has survived for centuries by reading the sea and living with its rhythms. The balance between individuality and unity is striking. Each atoll has its own character, yet the archipelago as a whole forms one of the most distinctive landscapes on Earth. What makes archipelagos fascinating is how they demonstrate the dual role of the sea. Water separates each island, creating unique ecosystems, dialects, and traditions. Yet the sea also links them, serving as a highway rather than a barrier. In the Caribbean, sailing between islands was once the only way to travel, and those journeys wove the region together. In Indonesia, inter-island trade carried spices, textiles, and ideas across the seas, creating networks long before modern borders. The sea divides, but it also binds, and nowhere is this clearer than in the geography of archipelagos. Nature too takes advantage of this geography. In archipelagos, species may spread from island to island, diversifying as they adapt to new conditions. The Galapagos, though smaller in scale, provide a famous example. Each island in the group hosts its own unique variations of animals, from finches with differently shaped beaks to tortoises with distinct shell forms. This patchwork of diversity within a single archipelago reveals how isolation and connection dance together, producing both unity and difference. Humans living in archipelagos often embody this same duality. In places like the Caribbean or the Philippines, identities are both local and regional. People may identify strongly with their own island, cherishing its dialect, food and traditions, yet also feel part of a broader island culture that transcends any one shore. Festivals, music and trade reinforce this shared identity, reminding islanders that they are part of something larger. Archipelagos thus nurture both pride in the particular and belonging to the collective. From a geographic perspective, the shapes and patterns of archipelagos are endlessly intriguing. Some form arcs, like the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, tracing the edge of tectonic plates. Others form clusters like the Seychelles, scattered across warm seas like a painter's brushstrokes. Still others create chains that stretch for thousands of kilometers, such as Indonesia, which spans a distance greater than the width of the continental United States. These patterns are not random but reflect the deep processes of geology: volcanic arcs, rising coral reefs, glacial remnants. The artistry of the Earth is on full display in the geography of archipelagos. Perhaps what makes archipelagos so compelling is their ability to embody contradiction. They are many and one, scattered and connected, diverse and unified. They remind us that identity need not be singular. It can be layered, interwoven, and complex. For travellers, archipelagos are a dream. The promise of hopping from one island to another, discovering how each is unique yet part of a larger whole. For those who call them home, they are places of belonging that embrace both individuality and community. So when we think of islands, it is worth remembering the power of chains. A single island may enchant, but an archipelago sings in harmony, its notes rising and falling across the sea. From Indonesia's sprawling expanse to the rhythmic arc of the Caribbean, archipelagos show us the geography of connection, a geography that celebrates difference while weaving it into unity. They are, in many ways, the Earth's most eloquent reminder that diversity and belonging are not opposites but companions, shaped by water and bound by history. Some islands vanish almost as quickly as they appear. A shoal may rise from the sea after a storm, only to sink again when the waves reclaim it. A sandbank may trick sailors into thinking they have discovered new land. Even entire islands have been mapped, described, and believed in for centuries, only to later be revealed as illusions, misplacements, or outright inventions. These invisible islands, whether temporary creations of nature or products of imagination, form one of the most curious chapters in the geography of the sea. Sandbanks are perhaps the most fleeting of these forms. Shaped by shifting currents and tides, they are constantly moving, building up in one place and eroding in another. Sailors throughout history both feared and relied upon them. In shallow seas, sandbanks could wreck a ship in an instant, yet they also created rich fishing grounds and sheltered waters. The Dogger Bank in the North Sea, once a fertile plain above sea level during the last ice age, is now a vast underwater plateau teeming with marine life. Today, it is famous for fishing, but in the distant past it may have been home to people, animals, and forests before the sea rose to reclaim it. Such places blur the line between land and sea, reminding us how fluid the boundaries truly are. There are also islands that live half in memory, half in myth. Phantom islands, as geographers call them, are land masses reported by sailors, drawn onto maps, and accepted as real, until later voyages proved otherwise. One of the most famous is High Brazil, said to lie west of Ireland. Medieval maps often marked it as a round island, shrouded in mist and visible only once every 7 years. Legends described it as a place of great wealth and wisdom, but no sailor ever reached it. Still, the island lingered on charts well into the 17th century, a ghostly reminder of how powerful the horizon can be to the imagination. The island of St. Brendan is another example. According to medieval accounts, the Irish monk Brendan and his companions sailed across the Atlantic in the 6th century, encountering an island paradise along the way. Pilgrims and explorers later searched for it, believing it to be somewhere near the Canary Islands, or even across the ocean toward America. Whether Brendan's story was allegory, embellished memory, or actual voyage, his island entered European maps and imaginations for centuries. It was not erased until the age of more precise navigation forced cartographers to admit its absence. Even in modern times, phantom islands have made appearances. In the South Pacific, sailors once reported an island called Sandy Island, supposedly located near New Caledonia. It appeared on maps for over a century, yet when Australian scientists sailed to its coordinates in 2012, they found only deep blue water. The mystery was solved. The island had likely been an error in 19th century charts, copied faithfully by generations of map makers. What began as a mistake ended up as a century-long illusion. Submerged lands carry a different kind of allure. Doggerland, the drowned landscape beneath the North Sea, was once a vast plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of forests, rivers, and human settlements now lying beneath meters of seawater. Rising seas after the last ice age gradually swallowed the land, turning it into a memory preserved only in sonar images and dredged artifacts. Doggerland is a reminder that many of today's seas were once dry land, and that the coastlines we take for granted are far from permanent. Other submerged worlds may have inspired ancient legends. The story of Atlantis, told by Plato, may have had its roots in memories of real places lost to floods or eruptions. While the grand city of his description is almost certainly allegorical, the idea that entire lands could vanish beneath the waves resonates because it has happened countless times in Earth's history. Coastal cultures have always known the sea can give as easily as it takes. Why do phantom and invisible islands captivate us so much? Part of the answer lies in the uncertainty of the sea. Before satellite mapping and GPS, navigation depended on observation, hearsay, and interpretation. A cloud bank, a distant iceberg, or the glimmer of mirage on the horizon could be mistaken for land. Once a report entered a map, it gained legitimacy, repeated by cartographers who often lack the means to verify it. Over time, these errors hardened into apparent truth, until someone finally sailed into the empty coordinates and found nothing. Yet the fascination goes deeper than error. Invisible islands capture the imagination precisely because they blur the line between reality and dream. They represent the hope that just beyond sight, something new awaits discovery. For sailors in the age of exploration, they promised riches, refuge, or adventure. For us today, they embody the mysteries that still linger in a world we often think of as fully charted. Invisible islands also remind us of the dynamic nature of Earth itself. Land is not fixed. It rises, sinks, and shifts. Volcanic islands like Surtsey appear overnight. Coral atolls can crumble under waves. Glacial melt can drown entire regions. An island that exists today may not exist tomorrow. Conversely, new land may erupt or rise from the sea when least expected. The map of islands is not static but alive, constantly redrawn by tides, tectonics, and time. There is poetry in the idea that some islands are more imagined than real. They inhabit a liminal space where geography meets storytelling. A sailor's tale told by firelight might place an island on the edge of the known sea. A cartographer's pen might give it a shape and a name. Generations later, explorers might search for it in vain. And though they return empty-handed, the island still exists in memory and myth, a ghostly landmark on the mental map of the world. So while invisible islands may never be destinations we can visit, they remain important. They show how human perception and natural change combine to shape our sense of place. They remind us that even in the age of satellites, the sea still holds mysteries. And they whisper a quiet truth. Sometimes the most intriguing islands are those that are not there at all, yet continue to drift in our collective imagination like mirages on the horizon. When scientists want to understand how life adapts, diversifies, and sometimes teeters on the edge of survival, they often turn to islands. Small, bounded and distinct islands are like nature's laboratories, where the rules of evolution and ecology can be seen with unusual clarity. From Charles Darwin sketching finches in the Galapagos, to modern biologists tracking endangered species and studying ecosystems, islands have offered answers to some of the biggest questions about life on Earth. The Galapagos Islands are the most famous example, etched permanently into the history of science. When Darwin visited them in 1835, he noticed something curious about the finches hopping from bush to bush. Though clearly related, the birds varied from island to island. Some had stout beaks perfect for cracking seeds, while others bore slender beaks suited to probing cactus flowers or catching insects. These subtle variations puzzled Darwin, but they later crystallized into one of the key insights of his theory of natural selection. Species adapt to their environments, and isolation fosters divergence. The finches of the Galapagos are now icons of evolutionary biology, not because they are particularly exotic, but because they reveal how tiny differences can accumulate into profound changes. The Galapagos are not alone in shaping our understanding of life. Islands across the globe have provided clues to how species evolve in isolation. On the Hawaiian Islands, for instance, an entire family of birds known as the honey creepers exploded into dazzling diversity, each species evolving distinct beaks and plumage to exploit different ecological niches. Some feed on nectar with curved, slender bills, while others crack seeds with robust beaks. This adaptive radiation mirrors the story of Darwin's finches, but on a grander, more colourful scale. Scientists studying honey creepers have gained valuable insights into how evolution can rapidly generate variety when opportunities are abundant. Beyond birds, islands are famous for producing unique giants and dwarfs. Evolutionary biologists call this the island rule. Without large predators, some small animals grow bigger than their mainland relatives, while large animals may shrink to survive with fewer resources. The result has been everything from giant tortoises in the Galapagos and Seychelles to pygmy elephants that once roamed Mediterranean islands. These evolutionary experiments demonstrate how geography shapes biology, compressing or expanding body sizes in ways that seem almost whimsical until you realise they're perfectly practical. Scientists have also turned to islands to study extinction. Because ecosystems are confined, the disappearance of species is often more visible. The tragic loss of the dodo in Mauritius, wiped out in just a few decades after human arrival, became an early symbol of human-induced extinction. Today, conservationists look to islands both as warnings and as opportunities. Islands account for a disproportionate share of endangered species, but they also serve as testing grounds for innovative conservation strategies. Eradicating invasive predators, reintroducing native plants, and establishing protected areas have shown remarkable results in island ecosystems, lessons that can be applied to larger landscapes. Modern conservation biology has embraced islands as frontline battlefields in protecting biodiversity. In New Zealand, sanctuaries on offshore islands have been established where invasive mammals such as rats and stoats are eliminated, allowing endangered birds like the kakapo and little spotted kiwi to recover. On islands in the Indian Ocean, careful restoration has brought back forests and reptiles once thought doomed. These successes are inspiring because they prove that with targeted action, even fragile ecosystems can rebound. They also highlight how islands can act as microcosms of the wider planet. What works in a bounded place might guide efforts on a larger scale. Islands have also been crucial for studying ecological principles beyond evolution. The theory of island biogeography, developed by Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson in the 1960s, examined how the size of an island and its distance from the mainland influence the number of species it supports. Their work showed that larger islands tend to host more species, while remote islands have fewer. This theory, tested with real-world observations from Pacific and Caribbean islands, has become a cornerstone of ecology, influencing everything from reserve design to habitat conservation. Remarkably, the insights gleaned from literal islands now guide conservation in metaphorical ones, patches of forest surrounded by farmland, or wetlands isolated by cities. The principles of islands apply wherever ecosystems are fragmented. Marine biology, too, has found islands invaluable. Coral atolls, volcanic shores, and mangrove-fringed coasts provide opportunities to study how land and sea interact. Islands often sit in biodiversity hotspots, where currents concentrate nutrients and coral reefs support extraordinary webs of life. Studies of these marine ecosystems have helped reveal how climate change, overfishing, and pollution affect the delicate balance of life in the ocean. Again, the island serves as both laboratory and alarm bell, showing changes earlier and more starkly than larger systems might. Even geology owes much to islands. The volcanic activity that builds chains like Hawaii or Iceland offers scientists a timeline of Earth's internal processes. By studying how islands emerge, erode, and eventually sink, geologists piece together the story of plate tectonics and the restless movement of the planet's crust. Each island becomes a chapter in the long book of Earth's geological history, written in basalt, ash, and coral. The fascination with science on islands is not purely academic. There is something poetic about how these small places reveal universal truths. The isolation that creates unique species mirrors the isolation of ideas in the human mind, where difference and innovation can emerge. The fragility of island ecosystems echoes the fragility of the planet as a whole, a reminder that boundaries can be both protective and perilous, and yet there is resilience. From finches to honey creepers, from giant tortoises to tiny frogs, life on islands has demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Scientists studying these creatures are not only cataloguing oddities, but uncovering the very mechanics of survival. Islands distill the complexity of evolution and ecology into forms that are easier to observe, like windows into the processes that shape life everywhere. In a way, every island studied by science is a teacher. The Galapagos taught us about natural selection. Hawaii revealed the wonders of adaptive radiation. Mauritius and its vanished dodo taught us about extinction. Modern conservation projects are teaching us about recovery and renewal. Together, these lessons form a curriculum written by the sea, one that continues to shape how we understand life itself. So when we think of islands, it is worth remembering that they are not only retreats, not only paradises or battlegrounds. They are also classrooms, places where the earth has laid out experiments in miniature, waiting for us to learn. For Darwin, a beak on a finch was enough to unlock a theory that changed the world. For scientists today, a lizard on a sand dune or a snail on a forest leaf may yet hold the next revelation. On islands, the boundaries are small, but the lessons they contain are vast. Today, islands are home to more than 600 million people. That is nearly 1 in every 12 humans living within a place bounded by sea. For some, that means skyscrapers, subways, and neon skylines on islands that pulse with modern life. For others, it means a hamlet of wooden houses by a lagoon, where traditions hold strong and the pace of the outside world feels distant. The human experience of islands is as varied as the islands themselves, stretching from dense metropolises to quiet villages clinging to the edge of coral reefs. Consider Singapore, a single island that has become one of the busiest city-states on the planet. With a population exceeding 5 million, it has transformed itself from a colonial outpost into a gleaming hub of finance, trade, and technology. The island is a study in contrasts. Glass towers reflect the tropical sun, while traditional hawker centres bustle with food stalls serving dishes rooted in the island's multicultural past. Space is at a premium, so every square metre is carefully managed, with vertical gardens and rooftop farms making up for limited land. Here, island life is not about scarcity, but about ingenuity, turning a small footprint into global influence. At the other end of the spectrum lie places like the Faroe Islands, scattered in the North Atlantic between Scotland and Iceland. With a population of barely 50,000, the Faroes are marked by steep green cliffs, sheep grazing on slopes, and villages with brightly painted houses huddled against the cold. Life here is shaped by the sea, with fishing remaining the economic backbone. Traditions like communal whale drives, though controversial internationally, remain central to local identity. The balance between preserving heritage and engaging with the wider world is delicate, but it is this balance that defines island living in a modern age. In the Pacific, islands like Fiji or Samoa embody another facet of this coexistence. Here, traditions of communal living and deep-rooted respect for elders and chiefs continue to shape daily life, even as tourism and global connectivity grow. Family ties are strong, ceremonies are woven into the year, and traditional dances and songs are cherished alongside smartphones and satellite television. Many Pacific Islanders speak of the coconut wireless, a tongue-in-cheek term for how quickly news and gossip spread in tight-knit communities. It is a reminder that even in a globalized age, local culture can remain at the heart of island life. Japan offers yet another perspective. As an archipelagic nation where islands large and small support over 100 million people. On Honshu, Tokyo hums with unmatched urban energy, while on Okinawa, life flows to a slower rhythm, shaped by subtropical seas and unique cultural traditions. Okinawa's distinct cuisine and longevity. It is one of the world's so-called blue zones, where people often live past 100 years, highlight how island traditions can sustain health and identity even amid modern pressures. The contrast within one nation of islands shows how diverse the balance can be, even across relatively short distances. The Caribbean provides countless stories of this balancing act. Islands like Jamaica, Barbados, and St. Lucia depend heavily on tourism, yet locals maintain strong cultural traditions through music, food, and festivals. Reggae, calypso, and carnival are not just entertainment, but expressions of identity and resilience. At the same time, these islands face the challenges of modernity, rising costs of living, vulnerability to hurricanes, and the push and pull of emigration. Many Caribbean families have members living abroad, sending remittances back home, creating an island culture that extends across oceans through diaspora communities. In the Indian Ocean, the Maldives presents a unique example of living with constraint. Spread across more than 1,000 islands, only a small fraction are inhabited. For Maldivians, daily life has always been a negotiation with the sea, fishing, boat building, and careful use of land and fresh water. Today, luxury tourism sustains much of the economy, but traditional dhoni boats still sail beside speedboats, and local island life continues largely apart from the resorts. Maldivian society shows how tradition and modernity can coexist, though not without friction, as rising seas threaten the very existence of many islands. What unites all these examples is the sense that island life magnifies both the opportunities and the challenges of modernity. Space is limited, resources are finite, and communities are often tight-knit. At the same time, islands can act as cultural beacons, preserving traditions that might fade elsewhere, precisely because of their relative isolation. A festival on an island can feel more intense, more cherished, because it gathers the entire community together in one place. The geography of islands often shapes this balance. Remote islands may struggle to keep young people from leaving for education or jobs on the mainland. Urban islands may wrestle with congestion and pollution, trying to squeeze 21st century infrastructure into narrow boundaries. Some islands rely heavily on imports for food and fuel, leaving them vulnerable to global disruptions. Others have turned to renewable energy, harnessing sun, wind, or geothermal power to reduce dependence. In every case, the island's size and setting create conditions that demand flexibility and foresight. Culturally, islands embody a kind of double vision. They are both inward-looking, focused on the rhythms of local life, and outward-looking, attuned to the wider world because the sea keeps them connected by ships and planes. Islanders often carry a strong sense of identity tied to their home, even as they maintain connections across oceans. This duality is part of what makes island life distinctive. It is grounded and rooted, yet it is also expansive and global. The balance between modernity and tradition is not always easy. In some cases, the influx of global culture threatens to overshadow local customs. Yet many islands have found ways to adapt, weaving new elements into old frameworks. Traditional music may blend with modern instruments, ceremonies may be live-streamed to family overseas, and ancient recipes may find new twists in bustling urban kitchens. Far from being static, island cultures are dynamic, constantly negotiating between heritage and change. Ultimately, life on islands today is about finding equilibrium. In crowded cities like Hong Kong or Singapore, the balance is between density and livability, between rapid development and the preservation of heritage. In remote places like Tristan da Cunha or the Faroe Islands, it is between tradition and modern connectivity, between resilience and reliance. In the Pacific or Caribbean, it is between tourism-driven economies and the need to maintain authenticity and protect fragile ecosystems. Islands have always been places of adaptation, where survival required resourcefulness. That spirit continues today as islanders blend modern tools with ancestral wisdom to carve out sustainable futures. Whether in the neon-lit streets of Tokyo or the quiet lagoons of Samoa, humanity's life on islands demonstrates the same lesson. That balance is not a static state, but a constant negotiation, shaped by tides, traditions, and the wider world pressing in. So when we think of islands now, it is worth picturing not only hammocks and beaches, but also bustling harbours, village dances, rooftop gardens, fishing boats, and school children walking along coastal roads. These are the scenes of everyday life in island societies, where the past and the present, the local and the global, weave together. They show us that islands are not relics of some simpler time, but vibrant places still evolving, finding harmony between tradition and modernity in ways that continue to inspire. An island is never just a piece of land ringed by water. It is also a symbol, a metaphor that drifts through human thought like a vessel of meaning. When people speak of islands, they often mean not only geography but states of mind, solitude, imagination, self-containment, and the yearning for separation. Across literature, philosophy, and even everyday language, islands appear again and again as images of what it means to be apart, to dream, or to define the boundaries of the self. At the heart of this metaphor lies solitude. To be on an island is to be surrounded, cut off, embraced by water that marks a clear border between you and the rest of the world. Philosophers and poets have often drawn on this image to describe the experience of being alone, whether for peace or for struggle. John Donne famously declared that no man is an island, reminding us that complete isolation is neither possible nor desirable. Yet the very fact that he used the image shows how natural it is to equate islands with individuality. Each of us, in some way, imagines ourselves as a small territory in a larger sea, distinct yet connected. Writers have long been enchanted by islands of the imagination. Think of Thomas More's Utopia, set on an island deliberately separated from the mainland to illustrate a society untouched by corruption. The isolation provided the conditions for a perfect experiment, free from the messiness of the wider world. Robinson Crusoe, stranded and self-reliant, became an enduring symbol of both vulnerability and human ingenuity. Even fantasy literature is dotted with islands of the mind. J.M. Barrie's Neverland, with its pirates and fairies, Tolkien's Numenor, a lost Atlantis of mythic grandeur. Islands in these stories are not just locations but dreamscapes, containers for human hope, fear, and creativity. Psychologically, islands resonate because they represent boundaries. In a world that can feel overwhelming, the idea of a finite space surrounded and protected is comforting. An island provides edges. It says, here is where the world stops, and here is where you can rest. This is perhaps why so many people fantasize about getting away to an island, even if the island in question is little more than a beach resort. The metaphor appeals not only to the adventurer, but also to the weary, promising both escape and enclosure. The image also works in reverse. Just as islands symbolize separation, they can also symbolize connection. The sea that cuts one island off from another is the same sea that links them together. This duality makes the metaphor so powerful. In thought, as in geography, we are both distinct and connected. Each mind is an island, but communication, language, art, song, acts like boats shuttling between us, carrying stories and emotions across the water. Artists and dreamers often speak of their work as an island. A painting, a poem, or a novel is a small world unto itself, shaped by its own rules and complete within its boundaries. To enter such a creation is to step ashore into a different reality, self-contained yet meaningful. This is why islands are so often settings in art. They mirror the creative act itself. They are discrete, bounded yet fertile with possibility. Even in philosophy and science, islands serve as useful metaphors. In ecology, the theory of island biogeography uses islands as models for how species colonize and adapt. But beyond the technical, islands also symbolize fragments of knowledge, isolated insights waiting to be connected into a larger map. Philosophers sometimes describe schools of thought as islands of certainty in a sea of doubt. The metaphor works because it captures the tension between what is known and what remains unexplored. There is also the island of the self, a metaphor that stretches across cultures. In Buddhist thought, the idea of becoming an island unto yourself suggests a state of self-reliance and mindfulness, a quiet independence from external distractions. In Western traditions, the same imagery often conveys both the strength and the peril of individuality. Too much insularity leads to isolation, but too little leaves the self without anchor. The island becomes a symbol of balance, contained but not cut off, unique but still part of a wider sea. Dreaming of islands is also dreaming of possibility. They are blank canvases for the imagination. The horizon hides them, and when they appear they often feel like revelations. In this sense, islands stand for discovery, whether of lands, ideas, or even personal truths. They are metaphors for the moments when something new breaks through the endlessness of the sea, offering ground where none was expected. Even language preserves the allure. We speak of islands of calm in turbulent times, islands of knowledge amid ignorance, islands of stability in a stormy world. The word slips easily into metaphor because it captures so well the human need to frame experience within manageable boundaries. An island in speech carries all the resonance of safety, separation, and clarity, even if no palm trees or beaches are involved. And yet islands of the mind are rarely just peaceful retreats. They can also be places of exile, symbols of isolation imposed rather than chosen. Throughout history, real islands have been used as prisons, and the metaphor lingers in our language. To feel islanded can mean to feel abandoned, marooned, or misunderstood. This darker side of the metaphor reminds us that solitude, while sometimes welcome, can also be lonely. The sea that protects can also confine. Perhaps what makes islands so enduring in human thought is this duality. They embody both freedom and limitation, sanctuary and exile, imagination and reality. They are places where contradictions coexist, much as they do in human experience. To dream of an island is to dream of escape and of enclosure, of selfhood and of connection, of clarity and of mystery. So when we think of islands, it is not only geography we're considering, we're also exploring the contours of our minds, mapping the boundaries of solitude, imagination and identity. Each island, whether real or metaphorical, invites us to reflect on what it means to be apart and what it means to belong. They resonate so deeply because they echo the human condition itself, distinct yet connected, bounded yet infinite in possibility. In the end, the most enduring islands may not be those that rise from the sea, but those that live within thought, carried from generation to generation like ships in bottles, small worlds we turn to again and again in search of meaning. Every island begins and ends with the sea. However solid its cliffs, however rooted its forests, however busy its ports, an island is always held within the embrace of water. The ocean is the context, the stage, and the lifeblood. To speak of islands without returning to the sea would be like describing a tree without mentioning the soil in which it stands. The sea is not just the backdrop, but the essence, the eternal force that shapes and sustains every island on Earth. The sea is a paradox. It separates, wrapping islands in solitude, yet it also connects them, carrying ships, fish, currents, and stories across vast distances. For millennia, the tides have been the heartbeat of island life. Fishermen set their nets according to their rise and fall. Traders once timed their voyages to the rhythm of monsoons, and entire cultures built calendars around the movement of the moon and the water it commands. Step onto almost any shore, and you will feel it. The gentle pull and retreat, the eternal breath of the ocean reminding you that nothing on an island is ever truly still. Geologically, the sea is both sculptor and destroyer. Waves pound cliffs into arches and stacks, carving beauty from resistance. Storms deposit sand to build beaches, then tear them away again in a single night. Coral reefs rise under the surface, fragile fortresses that protect islands from waves while nurturing entire worlds of marine life. And beneath it all, currents shift and swirl, redistributing warmth, nutrients, and sediments in patterns that connect even the most distant coasts. Islands are not self-contained fortresses of land. They are nodes in the living system of the sea. The sea also reminds us of impermanence. Islands come and go across geological time. Volcanoes erupt, lifting new land from the seabed, while others erode back into the water, leaving only atolls or submerged banks behind. What appears eternal in human time, the familiar shoreline, the dependable headland, is in fact fleeting when measured against the patient work of waves. Even mighty islands are temporary guests, sculpted by water and eventually surrendered to it. For people, the surrounding ocean has always been both gift and challenge. It provides food in abundance, fish, shellfish, seaweed, and salt. It offers highways for trade and communication, making possible the networks that bind island societies together. At the same time, it brings storms, isolation, and the possibility of shipwreck. Islanders live with this duality, grateful for the bounty of the sea, yet deeply respectful of its power. Many island traditions honour the ocean as a living presence, a mother, a guardian, or a god. Polynesian navigators sang to the waves, reading their swells like pages in a book, while Norse sagas told of seas both generous and cruel. The sea is not an accessory to island life, but its great companion, demanding reverence as well as reliance. Even in modern times, when satellites chart currents and engines cut across waves, the ocean retains its mystery. Vast areas remain uncharted, and beneath the surface lie ecosystems as complex as any rainforest. For island nations, this mystery is both resource and responsibility. Exclusive economic zones granted under international law give island states rights to vast tracts of ocean, many times larger than the land itself. In this sense, an island is never just a speck of earth, but the centre of an enormous maritime realm. The Pacific island of Kiribati, for example, has a land area of just 800 square kilometres, yet its ocean territory stretches across millions. The balance between land and sea in such places is almost comical. The sea dwarfs the land 1,000-fold, yet the island is what makes the sea belong. Culturally, the sea saturates island life in ways large and small. It shapes cuisine, from sushi in Japan to salted cod in the Azores. It shapes language, with words for waves, tides, and winds more numerous and nuanced in maritime societies. It shapes art and music, with lullabies that echo the sound of surf and dances that mimic the sway of currents. Even when islanders migrate far from home, they often carry the sea within them, in memories, metaphors, and rituals that tie them back to the rhythm of tides. There is also a psychological pull to the sea that explains much of the allure of islands. The horizon over water is endless, inviting daydreams of what lies beyond. At the same time, the sound of waves is soothing, steady, almost hypnotic. Scientists suggest that this is not coincidence. The rhythm of waves may mimic patterns in the human brain that encourage relaxation. Whatever the reason, people are drawn to the sea as if by instinct, finding in its ceaseless motion both comfort and inspiration. The eternal sea also has a way of humbling human ambition. Empires have risen and fallen while the waves kept rolling in. Ports have flourished and then silted up, while currents still sweep across the globe. No matter how many harbours are built, how many ships set sail, or how many satellites scan its depths, the ocean remains vast, powerful, and only partially known. For islands, this humility is constant. Every storm that batters the shore is a reminder that survival requires respect. Every calm day, with fish abundant and waters clear, is a reminder of generosity. The sea is eternal precisely because it is never entirely tamed, and yet islands are never apart because the sea ties them together. From the Caribbean to the Aegean, from Polynesia to Scandinavia, chains of islands are connected not just by geography, but by currents, trade winds, and shared histories of navigation. Even isolated islands, separated by thousands of kilometres, are part of a planetary ocean that links every coast. The phrase, the seven seas, may be a poetic shorthand, but in truth, there is only one ocean, a single body of water wrapping the globe. Every island floats in that continuity, part of a single, vast embrace. In the end, the eternal sea makes islands what they are. Not fragments of land adrift, but expressions of the ocean itself. Their beauty, their fragility, their uniqueness all stem from being held within water's restless circle. To think of islands without the sea would be like imagining stars without the night sky. The waves define them, connect them, and in time, reclaim them. So when you picture an island, do not stop at the shoreline. Picture the tides flowing in and out, the endless horizon stretching beyond, and the deep waters whispering stories older than any human map. The sea is the eternal partner, reminding us that islands are never truly alone. They are threads in the vast blue fabric of Earth, woven together by the restless, ceaseless motion of the ocean that cradles them all. As our journey among islands draws to a close, it is worth pausing to reflect on what they have shown us. These scattered fragments of land, surrounded on every side by water, have been many things throughout history: sanctuaries and prisons, laboratories of life and crossroads of trade, symbols of solitude and arenas of conflict. Yet in every case, islands reveal truths far larger than their size. They distill the essence of geography, ecology and culture into forms small enough for us to grasp, yet profound enough to echo across the world. To think of islands is to think of resilience. Time and again, we have seen how life adapts to the limits of space, to the scarcity of resources, to the challenges of isolation. A lemur leaping through a Madagascan forest, a kiwi shuffling through New Zealand's night, or a human community farming thin soils beside a restless sea, all embody the determination to endure. Resilience on islands is not about strength alone, but about flexibility, about knowing how to live within boundaries, how to turn constraints into opportunities. Islands teach that survival is rarely about having everything, but about making the most of what is there. They also teach us about creativity. Culture on islands flourishes in unexpected ways, precisely because of those constraints. When resources are few, imagination becomes abundant. New languages form, fusing elements from distant shores. Music emerges from oil drums turned into steel pans, from rhythms carried across oceans, from voices lifted in festivals that unite whole communities. Food combines influences from every direction, yet becomes unmistakably local. Even myths and legends take on new life, stories shaped by the sea's horizon and the dream of what might lie beyond it. Creativity thrives on islands, not in spite of limits, but because of them. The delicate balance of nature is perhaps the lesson most keenly felt in these small worlds. Islands are fragile gardens where the arrival of a rat or a goat can unravel millennia of evolution. They remind us that ecosystems are interconnected, that one small change can ripple outward with consequences far beyond its origin. At the same time, they show us how quickly balance can be restored with care. Remove an invasive species, protect a forest, and within years birds return, trees regrow, and life begins anew. On islands, the web of life is close enough to see and delicate enough to feel, making their lessons sharper and more urgent than in sprawling continents. And always, around and beneath it all is the sea. The ocean is the eternal companion, the frame and the heartbeat of island life. It provides food, connection, and mystery, while also demanding respect. Its tides carve shorelines, its storms reshape beaches, and its currents link even the most distant coasts into a single global fabric. To live on an island is to know the rhythm of water, to measure time not only by calendars, but by tides. For the rest of us, the sea that surrounds islands is a reminder that no place is truly separate, that all lands are joined by the same vast waters. Islands resonate deeply in human thought because they mirror our own condition. Each of us is, in some sense, an island, distinct, bounded, a small world unto ourselves, and yet, like islands, we are connected by the sea of human experience, tied together by currents of language, culture, and empathy. The metaphor of the island endures because it captures both sides of our existence, the solitude of being an individual and the connection of belonging to a greater whole. In a time when the world feels both vast and fragile, islands offer perspective. They show us what it means to live with limits, to find richness in smallness, to adapt without excess. They remind us that beauty and vulnerability often walk hand in hand, and they warn us too of what is at stake: rising seas, changing climates, and the erosion of balance. If islands are teachers, then their most urgent lesson is that survival depends on harmony with the world that sustains us. Yet it is not only lessons of caution that islands give us, they also offer peace. To sit on a shoreline and listen to the slow lap of waves is to feel time itself stretch and soften. The endless horizon, the whisper of wind in palms, the glow of sunset over water. These are images that calm the mind, lull the senses, and remind us of the quiet wonder woven into the planet. Islands show that sometimes the smallest places can hold the greatest stillness. As you picture the islands we have visited in thought, let your mind drift to the sound of surf, the play of light on water, the cry of a distant bird. Imagine walking across a beach where every footprint is quickly erased by the tide, reminding you that permanence is an illusion but presence is enough. Imagine standing on a cliff where the sea stretches without end, knowing that the land beneath your feet is both fragile and enduring, a temporary gift of geology and time. Every island is a world within the greater world, a reminder that the planet is made not only of continents, but of countless smaller stories. Together, they form a mosaic of resilience, creativity, and balance. And just as the sea gathers them into one ocean, so too their lessons gather into one truth, that to live well is to live with awareness, with respect for limits, and with gratitude for beauty. So let us end where we began, surrounded by the ocean, listening to the eternal rhythm of the tides. Let the imagination linger there, in the hush of waves and the embrace of water, in the knowledge that every island, no matter how small, carries within it the wisdom of survival and the promise of wonder. May that calm stay with you, like the sound of the sea in your mind, a quiet reminder that the world is vast, fragile, and endlessly beautiful, and that within it, every island is both a place apart and a part of everything.